All right, folks. September 14th, Monday. It is casual Monday over here. Thanks for watching What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. All right. Don't forget to follow the page don't forget to not follow. I told you to follow. Don't forget to like it on Facebook. All right. And don't forget to subscribe to it on YouTube and hit that notification bell so you know when we're about to go live. I'm trying to do it a little bit early today to get you guys to get you guys in here waiting before. Looks like it worked a little bit. So today we're going to go over some of the early, Rust Belt. I'm a little superstitious. All right. While we wait for Robert, let me tell you a little bit about how this is done over here. And Laura will tell you guys the same thing on Inside the Numbers. I'm superstitious, right? I don't like to look at the raw data. And here's Robert. He's in here. So let me just wrap up my thought. I don't like to look at too much at raw data. It doesn't tell you a whole lot. Even after years and years of doing it, you really need to process data and put it through. So that's what's taking so long. And then also as well, you know what? Let's bring Robert in and we'll talk a little bit more about it. All right. Let's bring Robert in here. There he is. How's it going?
Hey, good.
All right. So I was just telling everybody that house is, and you know this actually, how superstitious I am about looking at the raw data and reading too much into when we poll, right? So it may not tell you something right off the bat. There are a couple of things, man, that I just want to say flat out before these polls come out. All right. Iowa and Ohio are not close.
No,
they're not close, Robert. I mean, not at all.
It was a sign of the polling errors that anybody was saying they were close.
I mean, this is ludicrous to even think in the raw data, which is favorable to Democrats across the board this time, because we have to oversample. Almost always it is, right, as you know. And then we have to oversample. This is Ohio, just to show the map here. All right, let me take a little screenshot because you'll see the distribution of how it broke down in Ohio. All right, let me take a little screen grab. And Iowa, by the way, extremely. So Ohio, not so much. So the raw data, not so much as favorable to Democrats as it typically is. But still, the result in the raw is pretty clear, right? And then Iowa, really not so much at all. And by that, I mean, it looks really good. Like if Democrats would try to flip that state, they would need an electorate that looks pretty damn close to this, right? It's not going to happen, of course. That's number one. It's not going to happen. And even if it did, Biden would still narrowly lose it. All right. So in the raw, Democrats are overwhelming, man. I mean, overwhelming. It's like D plus 11 or something in the raw. It's something ridiculous, right? But in the raw, he's still down by 2 points. So what does that tell you when we weight it to near even, maybe R plus 2? Trump is, it's funny. And this is why I wanted to do it like this. Independents are different depending on where you are. Like in the national poll, we had it about even. But when you get into some of these Rust Belts, if you look in a state like Iowa and Ohio, Ohio, I think it could be that Ohio votes farther to the right than Iowa. I'm not kidding. It's possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was very close in 2016.
Yeah. And I was, and for the most part, people say, well, Iowa would be harder to flip. It does look like there are some opportunities there. And in 2018, they made some gains, but at the presidential level, because you can actually see the Republican candidate in the ballot, generic ballot, isn't doing as well as Trump is. So, which is astonishing. Maybe that turns out to be different on election day. And maybe people say, all right, I'll give Trump the Republican, maybe that he's got coattails and that happens.
I think that only happens if people, like the reason why I think some media polls are predicting the opposite, showing the generic ballot tighter than the presidential race, tells you who they're polling.
Yeah.
I think if upscale suburbanites think that Trump has no chance, that like 2016, they will vote Republican down ballot.
Yeah.
So that's where the Democrats are a bit tricky position. They need people to think the election is close enough for turnout purposes and for if they're going to try to steal any state and for House purposes, while at the same time they need these exaggerated poll results in order to build the narrative that Trump has no chance to depress his turnout. So they got a little bit of a trick to play. But I think in reality, as long as people think it's close, Trump will definitely outperform the Republicans down ballot.
Yeah, and also I think distribution had a big thing, a lot to do with it. So we'll look at the. I'll show you. Take a second to take a screenshot of Iowa too. But we did very well in Ohio as far as the distribution. So I didn't have to do too much, play too many games. But that's because of the targets and the quotas we set ahead of time. So it made a big difference. And I said, I'm not targeting. I don't wait for party. I don't target for party. By party. If you target everything else correctly. And did you read, we should get into this. Did you read Sean Trendy's article about whether the Rust Belt and Florida polls will be better this time around? What a hedge. I like Sean, but what a cop out, man.
Well, too, I'll give him credit that from his perspective, he's telling a counter narrative story, period.
Yeah.
So he's going to hedge when he does that.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that he's doing it, he's the only one doing it. He's the only one, and I know where he got some of those ideas that he references. I'm the one who gave him those ideas. Yeah. So because I was pointing that out to him that I said just do a cross check back in 2016. I said do a cross check on working class white size share of population. I also said geography rule too.
Yeah. He missed that in this article. He missed it.
Yeah.
Which I quote tweeted him. I was like, close, Sean, but you missed geography and region.
Yes, he did. He's focused on class. He still has appreciates the scope to which geography matters. Now, in some places, like Sean lives in Ohio, geography I think can be a little bit. Ohio, like Iowa, has no real metro sort of what I call a metropolitan
in
mindset. So you have Cleveland and Cincinnati, but they're not cities that are metropolitan. They're not like Philadelphia. They're more like Pittsburgh. So you don't even really have a Milwaukee or a Detroit. Definitely not a Detroit. And not a Philadelphia. You just have Cleveland, where the Democratic machine is decent but not great, and Cincinnati historically had a Republican machine. If you go back in the day,
that's right. So that's right.
You don't have any place where the Democrats can bank votes, and they can't steal it out of Ohio either. The only useful thing that DeWine has done is that he at least will be good on that side of the equation. So Ohio and Iowa are not close, and the fact that any poll is saying it's close means they're not surveying the state well.
Yeah, I just don't see how it's. Look, again, some of this has to do with distribution, but even in Ohio, let me pull it up. Even in Ohio, you really are missing. Like, you really are concentrating your responses if you think it's close. All right. Yeah, so you must be. Here's our distribution. If you think it's close. All right. Pretty solid. All right. Now you're going to have some stuff, that blur over.
Yes,
it is. It's right. It's really right on the money. You have some of the darker areas, folks, means, like one dot is obviously not a response. It means where are you getting it from? And then some of these move over. I zoomed in, so they move around to try to make room on the screen. So, it's a little bit north of Toledo, but you can see where Toledo is. And then those little bit looks a little close to Detroit, but it's northern Toledo, so, and then over on to the south, eastern part of the state. That's where, like bleeding into West Virginia, Parkersburg, West Virginia, that is where in 2016 we underestimated him, because that big, solid purple dot was giving us an enormous crossover number. And I didn't believe it. Right. I was like, what? There must be something wrong.
That's old black coal country. So it votes very much like southwestern Pennsylvania. The counties that just sued the governor and won in Pennsylvania. I mean, those are counties that they voted for McGovern in 1972, folks. I mean, that's how democratic they used to be. And now they're the heart of the Trump base. There was a map recently where they showed the counties where Trump did better than any Republican ever, better than Reagan, better than Eisenhower. It's those counties. It's black coal country in southeastern Ohio and western PA.
And I'll tell you, this time I'm not going to make that mistake. Okay, so this time I know they're going to vote for him in enormous, and they haven't changed their voter registration. This is the craziest thing. So they are telling us they are Democrats. Well, I'm a Democrat. If you are 30 to 54 years old and you are a male, you live in southeastern Ohio, there's almost no damn relationship. Your party affiliation, my point is, your party affiliation should not dictate to a pollster whether or not it's going to swing one way or the other, especially men, but definitely women too, Robert. I mean, it's a big margin, margin.
Which shows, by the way, that all these polls that keep showing, when I see polls that show Democrats with unprecedented unity and Republicans with high levels of divisiveness, they're telling me that they're polling folks at the Starbucks and the Whole Foods.
Yeah, so
because that's not the
that's
case in
just not.
Southeast Ohio.
Yeah,
It's not possible.
it's not happening. We're in double digits for Donald Trump in Ohio, and we're in single digits for Joe Biden. So the crossover vote is low, 6% in Pennsylvania, 7% tops. It depends on how it's going to work out when the weights are in. And then Trump again is taking 12, 13% of the Democratic vote. And but it's big, why it matters in a place. I think, look, if you had to put a gun to my head right now and I had to make a decision, I'd say Pennsylvania is going to be really, really close to even, maybe 1-2 points, something like that. So,
it's going to be tight.
It's going to be tight, but he's got independents by like 5 points, and he won them by 4 in 2016.
Well, I think what's going to help him is turnout. I think turnout in places like Pennsylvania, his vote's going to come out, and I think a lot of Biden's vote is not going to come out. I think African-American vote will be the lowest it's been in a while, is my estimation. In places like Pittsburgh and Philly, especially, and there's even a university poll, I think, out of Pennsylvania today that has him running 10 points behind Hillary in the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah,
and so
that doesn't shock me at all. It really doesn't.
Enthusiasm is going to be his problem. And for all the, remember I said if I was a conspiracy theorist against Trump, I would say that he would get somehow riots to occur in either Pennsylvania and Michigan after he did Wisconsin and Minnesota. I mean, if you're on the conspiracy theory side, then yesterday we have riots in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So so it's like, I mean, the left keeps on gifting him this. I mean, all they need now is to check off Michigan somewhere. Maybe make it like Grand Rapids or someplace you never expect. Because I mean, Kenosha, you don't expect. Lancaster, you don't expect.
What are they doing, man?
It's mind numbing. They're believing their own polls that show, the media saying, "Oh, look, actually, the country prefers Joe Biden on Law and Order." Yeah, good luck with that pitch.
I do see. Listen, here's what they're doing though, because I do understand where some of those results are coming from. But again, it's another mess up. It's a mess up. Parse out the law and order versus the racial inequality.
Of course.
So it depends how you ask that question. And then when we feed them off, and you know how because when you look at just those who pick policing and crime as their number one issue, Trump is killing him by like 30 points. And then if you ask them, which one do you trust more, they'll give Biden a little edge. But when you ask them the difference between racial inequality and policing and law and order, it's not even close. So they're not being specific enough. That's what it is, I think. And then,
it's because I think they don't want that message to get out. I think they're hurting the anti-Trump vote into a group to say, see, the law and order is not a winning issue for Trump. And try to back Trump off of it, try to back others off of it. Knowing that that's just not realistic. For those voters who really care about that issue, that's going to be a very pro-Republican trending issue, and the more it rises in consequence in the polls, the more it favors him. Which you can tell by just Joe Biden's own behavior. He's trying to walk back everything that he did over the summer, over the last 2 weeks. He and Kamala Harris suddenly deeply care about police. They're worried about the cops that got shot in California, and the whole different dynamic coming from them, which tells you their internals show he's not winning on the law and order issue.
Yeah, I made that look very ugly. I'm trying to pull it up, but if you remember the other week, we talked about really all that matters. And in 2016, that extremely number mattered a lot. And when you're looking at when you start to really tighten your your likely voter model, right? Then some of those people have to go. All right. You don't want to cast anybody aside, but when you're trying to determine who really is going to vote, so our choices are, and the question is, how enthusiastic are you about voting for your preferred candidate? The choices are extremely, very, moderately, slightly, and not at all. The truth of the matter is, in all 6 states combined, if you just look at extremely, Biden's barely competitive. That is really the truth. It's about 52.5 to 47.5. Just those voters alone who make up overall more than half of the so-called electorate, right? Yep. That's a big deal. Biden needs you to include moderately before he can take any kind of an advantage. And Robert, and I know those voters do not jump out to go vote, which is why they need this mail-in crap, Robert. Now that I'm looking and finding now that I'm really looking into all of these numbers, this is why they need this, man, because they need somebody to do that for them, right?
They need low propensity voters to vote.
Yeah, they really do. The love is with Trump. So of those people who said we're extremely enthusiastic to vote, they passed the likely voter screen, the initial likely voter screen, and they're extremely enthusiastic. 92% told us that their vote is a vote for Donald Trump. 92%. That number is like 60 for Joe Biden. It's bad. And
in fact, it's the worst because it's a number that I've been tracking for a long time. It's the worst disparity ever.
It's got to be. I asked Laura to research it. It's got to be the biggest one in the history. It has to be.
While Hillary had her critics, Hillary did have a part of the Democratic base that was very enthused about her.
Yeah,
there's nobody enthused about Joe Biden. Nobody at all. I mean, it's atrocious.
And the who do you think is going to win question and voter expectations go back to 2008. John McCain and Barack Obama traded leads. They did
throughout September.
Throughout September. But Barack Obama was always expected to win that election. And I'm not the only one. There's the Brookings Institute looked at this, not exactly right leaning. Gallup has written about this before they quit the horse race, for years. And they asked this question: voters expect a certain candidate to win. They typically win. It can be more predictive than the voting intention, which has missed in the past.
It has been more predictive historically. Who they believe will win has been a more accurate forecaster than most of the other models out there. Not a perfect one, because they did think Hillary was going to win in 2016, but that was due to the media barrage.
This time, though, you would think that would happen again, Robert, because
I think because Trump won in 2016, they've learned to discount what the media says is happening. And consequently, you're getting a much more accurate feel of who they know and who they're connected to and what their neighbors get. And there's clearly, I was arguing with Trendy and some other people on this, and Harry Enton and Nate Silver, of course, who keep pushing this idea that there's no shy Trump voter out there.
I know. I've seen this.
And the the idea was somehow if you have an enthusiastic supporter, you can't have also a shy supporter in the same group. And it's like, how do you not understand the differences between the two? I compared it to this. I said, just because you had gay pride parades in San Francisco in the 1970s didn't mean you didn't have a guy that was in the closet in rural Alabama in the 1970s.
No kidding.
You have very different groups and places they're at.
And they're using that sign thing as an example. It's ridiculous. You're much more willing to put a sign in your yard than you are to tell a stranger who you're going to vote for. That's so right. You're in your neighborhood, you're in your safe zone.
My view is that most of the shy Trump supporters are simply people who live in a different demographic who aren't going to put up a sign or anything, because I know them personally. I mean, because their wife would be mad at them, because their whole local place where they work would be mad at them, because their local neighborhood would be mad. It's going to be disproportionately your upper middle class voter who's a shy Trump voter. You'll have some middle class ones too. You'll have some African American shy Trump voters who will not want. You'll have Hispanic because they don't want crap at the local barbershop. They don't want to deal with all that stuff. So they're not going to say who they're going to vote for, and so. Because of the cancel culture I think there was a bit of a shy Trump voter in 2016, but it's much bigger in 2020 because of cancel culture taking place and cancel culture reaching into middle America when, gym coaches and secretaries and warehouse clerks feel at risk if they talk about or share their political viewpoints. Because that's some of the people getting kicked off social media. They're plumbers getting kicked off social media because of saying something related that turned out to be politically incorrect. People supporting Kyle Rittenhouse have been shut down. People supporting Alex Jones have been shut down. None of that happened in 2016. So there is a reason. I mean, the other thing is I know them. I know several people who are shy Trump voters. Who were not in 2016.
That's the most ludicrous thing. Like some of the stuff, I know what you're talking about. I've been seeing it on Twitter. We talk to people unlike them. And I can't get it out of my head, this family in Micanopy, Florida, for people who don't know where this is. Historic little business district. It's been around forever, since like Ponce de Leon landed. Who knows, but it's old. And that family owns one of them. There's like a couple businesses and 2 cafes. That family is so pro-Trump. They have flags everywhere last time around. When this all really started, they took some of their stuff down because they were afraid they were going to get a brick through the window, even though it's safe to say they're rural, right? So, you wouldn't think anything of that. He's still got a sign at his house, but he's just afraid that a brick's going to go through his window, right? They have not stopped supporting Donald Trump. They're still incredibly enthusiastic for Donald Trump. They love him, but they're not going to display that this time around. And I can't get people like that out of my head, because the truth is what they're saying doesn't make any sense, because of the simple fact that there are already people who are too scared. So what their sign argument, well, they'll put a sign up, but they won't, they'll be shy to tell a pollster. There would be more signs, Robert, if there wasn't
and the enthusiasm is already high. I mean, they're clearly the Trump is winning the sign battle at a level that he didn't even win it in 2016. So, but you can have both great enthusiasm and a shy voter, and often they're 2 different voters. And so it's another reason to be skeptical of the surveys and the poll data in 2020, and why it will be even less reliable than it was in 2016, when in fact, of course, in the States, they've been unreliable since 2014, to some degree, all the way back to 2010. As soon as we shifted to cell phone-based modelings, or basically, as soon as the response rate dropped to the single digits, and all of a sudden you were trying to call cell phones rather than landlines, the accuracy rate just plummeted. And the only guy willing to even discuss it, and even he has to discuss it in a hedging way, is Sean Trende. He has to try to hedge while making points that are like, oh, by the way, 2018, all the media polls were kind of wrong again, just FYI. But, I'm not saying that's going to happen again. I get why he feels the need to hedge, but it tells you something about that polling world, that there is any need to hedge at all. And now, of course, some Latino activists on the left are finally coming out and saying, oh, yes, Biden does have a huge problem. Yes.
They're flipping out. They're completely melting down. And that's also another Hispanic independence. We poll in Florida. He's doing very well with them. But in a place like Michigan, not a huge Hispanic population, but they still they haven't warmed up. Well, he's doing better than last time. But, it's just,
but that's a very illegal immigrant sensitive vote throughout the Midwest, because almost all of those folks are at least one are either personally connected or are one generation away from illegal immigration. And so that's the big difference. I mean, your Puerto Ricans are mostly not illegal immigrants, of course. Same with the Cubans, same with a lot of the Venezuelans and Colombians. That's why the Mexican-American vote out of Florida, out of large parts of Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, and even parts of Arizona. Arizona can be mixed. Are not nearly as illegal immigrant sensitive as your urban Mexican-American voter in the North and the Mexican-American voter in California.
In Iowa had the most pivot, what people say, they call them swing counties. We like Ballotpedia. I'm pretty sure Ballotpedia grabbed that from us. We called it pivot counties, going back to 2014. Iowa had the most pivot presidential counties, all right, ones that voted for Barack Obama and then jumped over to Donald Trump. Here's the distribution in Iowa. All right. Now watch this, Robert. And I'm telling you, he's still down by 2 points in the raw. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. This is the distribution. I mean, it's still not bad, but it should be like, if you're a Democrat, you want this. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that southwestern corner and not far from Omaha is one of the most populous parts of the state.
Right.
Sioux City's where you have your strong evangelical presence. Up north is where you have some Norwegians and some crossover with Wisconsins and Minnesotans. Dubuque is where you get your German Catholics in the east. But those are all the areas where Trump surged. Where Trump struggled was a little bit of Iowa City and a little bit of Des Moines.
Yeah, and if you look to the east of Iowa City, a lot of responses there. That's where it starts to get. So, right there by Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Joe Biden's obviously doing his best. Right as soon as you start to go east, it falls apart for him. So that's what, you know what I mean? So,
And
and
I
these
mean,
people
again, for everybody
identify.
out there, the other factor I was telling people for both Iowa and New Hampshire, even Siena, New York Times admitted that was a tiny sample size, but they admitted New Hampshire was basically within the margin of error.
Yeah.
And remember, folks, Biden did terrible in both states.
Yeah, that's right. That's a big
These
key
people
here.
saw him up close, and they're like, "This guy has no business being president."
His favorability level sucks. In actually, I was thinking of you when I looked at this, because you were right. The automotive connection in Michigan is there. It's there.
Oh,
His
yeah.
his favorability is the best in Michigan. Biden's I'm talking about. It's better than even in Pennsylvania. Another thing that jumps right out, we asked about fracking. People support fracking in this part of the country. Period. End of story.
Yes.
So maybe you
That's
can
a
get a
huge
YouGov poll.
problem for Biden. Huge problem.
It's a big issue, and I think that's why he's losing so much of his Democratic base. 20% of the black vote in Pennsylvania. I haven't seen numbers like this since George W. Bush took like 18% or something, and still lost it because he still couldn't make inroads with those working Democrats in the rest of the state, everywhere outside of Philadelphia and the suburbs, and then a little speck in Allegheny where Pittsburgh is. Right. Trump is just dominant everywhere else. That really will come down. The first county I'm going to look at on election night is Bucks County, because if Donald Trump can flip,
if he wins it, then it's game over.
It's over. It's over. Yeah, because
he lost it in 2016 and still won. He did.
That's right. And he's right now, he's really running pretty strong there. Oh, let me grab Pennsylvania too. I'll let you comment on that while I grab Pennsylvania, but I'll show you the distribution in Pennsylvania was solid. All right. So, but again, in all of these states, you've got to what's the word I'm looking for here? To try to be fair to Biden, you have to keep a loose likely voter screen right now. So I don't really know where all of these other pollsters are coming up with some of their numbers. If you tighten the voter screen, Robert,
they're not trying to get a broad cross section. So the reason why for folks out there that Pennsylvania average media poll was overstated the Democratic margin by 7 points in 2016. Overstated Clinton's margin by 6 in Michigan. Overstated Clinton's margin by 8 on average in Wisconsin. Overstated it by 8 in Minnesota. Overstated it by 7 in Iowa on average. This was the average poll taken throughout the fall, and overstated it by 8 in Ohio. So, I mean, they were consistently wrong in a consistent direction. And the large part of that is because I remember I met Doug Johnson, who's on the left, who sort of does polling analysis for like Counterpunch or publications like that. And he's starting to highlight concerns, even though he's an obvious Trump critic because he's from the left, from Canada and Michigan. And we got in discussion about Pennsylvania in 2016, and I just pointed out 2 issues. One was educational attainment, but I said the big one is cultural. They can't get – pollsters were privately admitting to people that they could not get middle rural Pennsylvania to just respond to the polls.
I'm about to show you something right now. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Yeah,
you nailed it. You nailed it.
Unless you go to extraordinary efforts to oversample those groups, and honestly, you probably have to poll more than a day or 2. You have to probably be out in the field closer to a week. You're just not going to get them. And then they struggled to get them all the way through. So what they were picking up was what was happening in Philadelphia. Well, that's what they were picking up, and that was a Democratic trending group in the suburbs in 2016. So that's why they thought, and of course, Chuck Schumer was so bad at math, he went out and publicly said, don't worry about it in Pennsylvania. For every blue-collar vote we lose, we pick up 2 in the suburbs. That's not the math, Chuck. There's 4 times as many of those blue-collar guys as there are suburban swing voters in Montgomery and Delaware and Chester. And so that math is what killed the Democrats in 2016. They're a little more aware of it in 2020, but they had this naive idea that because Joe Biden pretends to be from Scranton, that was going to work in Pennsylvania. And there was a good piece in the American Spectator, but there's also been pieces out of the left. And then Selena Zito does good. She's from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, she does.
Pennsylvania, she has her ear to the ground very well. And they're all reporting. Good piece of the American Spectator is about how almost everybody in West Pennsylvania and these are Democratic union halls people are going. Basically, you can throw a rock, hit a Union Democrat in Western PA, and they're likely voting for Trump. That's the kind of numbers he's getting because fracking for people who don't know, fracking saved a lot of the old places of old energy and old manufacturing jobs that had got crushed over the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Fracking is what came in and rescued them. in places like not only Western PA, but like I started looking at where fracking jobs were strongest. There's actually a bunch of good fracking jobs outside Scranton and up in Northeast PA. In other words, if you tracked where fracking is strong, you would also track where Trump overperformed in 2016, and he's really going to overperform in 2020. There's a reason why Biden's suddenly begging everybody to forget that he talked about banning fracking. And he's running around the state, and Kamala Harris is trying to pretend she didn't say ban all fracking.
Shameful what the media is doing, allowing them to do that, though. Shameful.
Exactly. The problem is that nobody buys it. Those guys pay because they're in an industry that they're like the miners. When they try to pretend Hillary didn't say she was going to close down all the coal mines, they knew better because those guys pay great attention to things that impact their employment, and they're in industries that have been burned by Democrats for the last 20 years. Because the whole problem is every time the Democrats talk about environment or climate change, what those voters hear is, oh, there goes my job. There goes my good wages. And that's why Democrats don't understand. There's no net plus for them pitching climate change. They have all the Zoomers and millennial professional class people they're going to get. Every time they talk about climate change, like using the fires in California and Oregon as a pretext to talk about climate change. If I'm Trump, I love it every time they talk about that because that kills them in the upper Midwest. The Midwest has always been opposed to environmental politics because it's always been a job loss deal, going back to the car pollution rules. So that is his biggest individual policy handicap, aside from all the other issues which Trump will continue to hammer him on, and the fact that he signed every bad trade deal Joe Biden's done. The Trump's line that he should keep repeating is Joe Biden sent your jobs to China and your kids to die in overseas wars.
Yep.
And that's the way to win the upper Midwest. And he should say that every speech again and again and again, come back to it in the debates repeatedly, which he probably will. But that's where I think it's all going to be close, but Michigan will probably be the most pro-Biden state of the 4 states that are up there.
Yeah.
More so than Minnesota, I think.
It's looking, I was just going to, it's looking like it, but that's why we've only been in now really in the field for 2 days. So I'm not in a rush, I'm just not. I'll get it out by Wednesday, but look at Michigan, looks good. Michigan to me looks good. And I have a feeling I know where this race stands, but it's not totally processed yet, but the distribution looks good. Can you see it?
That looks very good. Particularly, it's very hard to get. You'll see people do polls that get nobody in the upper part of the state.
Nothing. Yep. We did it.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, so because it's I'm very curious what's happening in the upper part of the state, northern part of the state. That's what put them over the top. Like a lot of the pollsters in 2016 just basically they stopped polling once you got north of Flint effectively. I mean, they tried to get those voters, they just couldn't. And so they're polling if you stopped at Flint, just Flint South, then you got a Hillary win by 6 or 7 points. It was that the northern part went so huge for Trump in those small mostly rural counties that they did well there. And so how Trump is doing there is going to be key. How he's doing places like Bay County are going to be interesting. And of course, Macomb County, the blue collar.
Yep.
Monroe, Monroe right south of Detroit can be an interesting county. So those, he'll get crushed out of Wayne and out of Ann Arbor and out of Lansing. But as long as he holds his own to 2016 numbers, then I think he'll still be very Michigan will be very close, and he still very well could win it. It'll just be of the 4 states that are competitive in the upper Midwest. Ohio and Iowa will be easily in Trump's pocket, but the other 4, Michigan will probably be the toughest state for him to win.
I agree. I think that Pennsylvania. Oh, let me show you the distribution in Pennsylvania. When you see it, this is why I am more bullish and have been on Pennsylvania now for a while. And here's why. We were just talking about it last week. Remember, we were talking about the registration changes. These are people, though, who are still telling us. So Trump took 12% in 2016 of the Democratic vote. If those were just cannibalizing votes, then you wouldn't see Trump still pulling that much of the Democratic vote. So the crossover share would come down some. But in fact, it is not. And the party registrations are still better for him. He's actually got independents by about a point more. He's taking about 20% of the black vote. And I am not kidding. That is not a joke. I don't subscribe to some of these national polls that are showing him with a lot more black approval. I'm sure there's more. And we even had it around 12. I'm talking about some of the bigger ones. Even Marist had it pretty big in their national. I think it was like 30%. I'm not on board with that yet. But we missed the entire north central part of the state, which is what we're targeting now. All right. And still, he's running very strong. This is the distribution in Pennsylvania. Northeastern looks good. All west, out west, because see where Warren is? That's a very small population center. So it's light purple, but I think we did pretty well. Altoona in the central part of the state, Harrisburg, all the way to the southeast. We got a lot out of Bucks, a lot out of Chester, a lot out of Delaware. We're happy there. Scranton, was the key for me, because I'm like, well, if Biden's going to do something, he's got to win back a lot of that vote. And then in the northwestern part of the state, a lot out of Erie, which is a big population for that part of the state. It's painting a pretty clear picture. He's not making gains with those voters. He just isn't. Yep. And the deal is whether or not he'll squeeze out so much more out of Philadelphia and Chester. And I don't know, though, Robert. Again, I'm skeptical, my friend. And by the way, we don't have him doing that badly in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So this idea that he's getting clobbered in the suburbs, that's maybe he was a month ago, or whatever, maybe. But that's just not happening right now. So I could absolutely see a scenario where he loses Michigan, maybe even Wisconsin, whatever. Let's play a game, what if game, right? Yeah. And, but he sneaks away because Iowa and Ohio are not that close. And then he takes Pennsylvania, holds Pennsylvania, and maybe plucks off Minnesota and New Hampshire, because the numbers with these voters, they're big. Now there's some the state like Pennsylvania, I actually would have expected him to get more of the white vote, but he's doing so much better, and black population is higher for a Rust Belt in that state than some of these. So it's no small finding that he's pulling 20% out of Pennsylvania, folks, because let's look at it right here on the voter file. 10%. And in Ohio, by the way, he's similarly doing very well with black voters in Ohio.
And that would make sense, and sort of in general, you would sort of expect that kind of gap or comparison to be taking place. I can't get my tie right today. It's driving me half crazy.
That's why I went. I don't know if you heard me. I said it's Casual Monday over here, folks.
There you go. Yeah, a good idea. I'll just keep it loose. And I'm just like you. I figured out why you're struggling to point to maps. Because it's counter directional when you're looking at yourself on camera.
Yeah.
Where it's always I keep wanting to do this.
The weatherman
to do that. I mean, I think Pennsylvania. I haven't seen any move. I mean, all the voter registration data. Got into a debate with a sort of lefty elections professor, who really was obsessed with just new voters, and it's like I've seen that data run every cycle since 1996.
Since when they've been doing this forever.
New voters always favors Democrats, ever since motor voter, because it's younger and minority voters who tend to be very low turnout voters, by the way. It's not a sign of enthusiasm or excitement, because they're being automatically registered. After motor voter was put in so many states, the degree to which new registrations mattered, you really need to look at demographics. I learned that what mattered to me was someone who was already registered changing registration. That to me was significant. An older voter flipping it. And so he had convinced himself that all the numbers that had dropped off, that net registrations didn't matter at all. That all that mattered was who were the new voters who had registered. Yeah. And I was like, it's just the opposite. Because I went back and looked for at Pennsylvania. I was curious. I was like, if we look at the history, when has voter registration trends within a state, from one presidential election cycle to the next, when it trends in one particular direction by 1 point or more, has that indicated that party that picked up additional votes, that where the party registration trend was in their favor. And went back and looked at Pennsylvania, for example, in between 2000 and 2004, Republicans, it trended less Republican than it has since 2016, but still trended Republican by 1 point. And what happened? W made it much more competitive in 2004 than it was in 2000. Same thing happened between 2004 and 2008. Trended Democratic. Democrats picked up more votes. Trended more Republican between 2008 and 2012. Republicans made it more competitive. Same thing happened between 2012 and 2016. So in Pennsylvania, since we have available publicly published voter registration data, what it shows is that, in fact, the voter registration trends have been predictive. The net registrations, not new registrations, because new registrations have been almost always pro-Democratic during that time period because of who is a new registered voter, usually a younger voter, usually a millennial minority voter in particular. If you looked at net registrations, and net registrations is presidential cycle to presidential cycle, how much of an edge does one party have over the other? Even though Democrats have always had an edge overall in voter registrations in Pennsylvania since 2000, that gap has shrunk. It shrunk between 2004 towards Republicans, then moved back towards Democrats in 2008, then back towards Republicans in 2012, continued towards Republicans in 2016, and has had the biggest leap it's ever had between 2016 and 2020, moving more than 2 points in the Republican edge in terms of margin. Historically, that has always predicted who's going to pick up more votes. So by that standard, Trump is going to improve his margin in Pennsylvania, not lose his margin in Pennsylvania. And other states have similarly trended. So that suggests Florida, he's going to improve his margin, not lose his margin. North Carolina, improve his margin, not lose his margin. So in those states, and I think you're starting to see more and more of the media acknowledge this, because you have more and more people at Crystal Ball and other places trying to game out how Biden can still win if he loses Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida.
I know you see them already doing the different scenario. This sounds really familiar, Robert. I'll tell you too. And I'll put up the other ones, the other maps. But in Pennsylvania specifically, what you were just saying with the registration trends, that usually does also, predict that maybe the crossover vote isn't as heavy, right? So because they changed, if they're going to take the time to go, change their voter registration, then the share of the crossover vote will go down. And in truth, we just are not seeing that. So he's starting now with like a little bit better of a base. So it looks like it could be like D+3 or D+4. That is not good enough. Especially since the most enthusiastic voter is a rural working voter. That is most enthusiastic. It's not even close. I mean,
old school. It's like Harry. If we were doing this in 1948, we would have picked this up for Harry Truman.
Yeah,
that they were very blue collar, particularly in rural small towns. And remember, folks, they never got 1948 correct polling wise.
Nope.
And they had better polling methods then than they do now. And they were going door to door back then. Their sample size was like 10,000 people. I mean, not 250 like Sienna's doing. The other interesting.
What was that? I just don't. I'll tell you what. I got like 2 calls.
They're not willing to spend the money this cycle.
I got 2 calls from 2 pollsters this weekend. Like, it's a good result for Trump in New Hampshire. Did you see it? I heard your show. You were saying because we did a poll for someone in New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago. We had Trump up in New Hampshire, and it was because of those voters. Our sample was 689 or something, so much big enough in a state like New Hampshire. And I feel like
you want at least 500. Anything under 500.
You want to hit 5 in New Hampshire.
Really not. Yeah. It's your margin of error is going to be off the charts.
That's why I'm like envying Gallup a little bit this cycle, man. I am, because I'm here we go again. And I'm not saying whether it's a win or a loss. I'm saying that I'm finding consistent different themes again. And I feel like I want to pull a Gallup, like, you know what? I'm done, man. But then you just see, Well,
I mean, for folks out there, whenever the class gap is big, the polls tend to be wrong throughout American history. And our polls are worse now than they've ever been in that capacity. And simply weighting by educational attainment doesn't fix the problem. If your non-college voter, like Quinnipiac, is a 20-year-old college student at Penn, you're not exactly getting the working class voter that demographic's supposed to represent.
They still refuse to wait completely for
Oh,
education.
yeah. Several of them are. And Marist is not waiting either. So there's several that are not waiting at all still, and those that do still are not getting the actual cross section you need. That's by geography, age, and education is a pretty good. That combination will tell you working class versus middle class versus upper
Right.
middle
That's
class.
right.
And so
That's exactly right.
so like, if you're blue collar voter in parts of Bucks County and Northeast Philly and Southwest Philly, which by the way, reports are that Trump is pro-Trump signals out of Northeast Philly. Well, this relates to your old ethnic ancestry is substantially up. It's because Italians are going more heavily public for Trump this cycle than they did even in 2016. I told people, if you followed, like, just as you followed Nordic supporters for Trump in Minnesota and parts of Michigan, parts of northern tip of Iowa, parts of western Wisconsin, because they're big anti-war voters. The other group that trended very heavy Trump, that's sort of patriotic nationalist by instinct, and as a sort of no-nonsense group, that was his first natural base within the Republican presidential elections, why he was always going to sweep the Northeast in the Republican primaries, because those voter profiles had changed. They weren't your Poppy Bush Republicans anymore.
That's right. Right.
They were your Irish and your Italian and your Polish. They were, but particularly Italian in the Northeast. Trump does great among Central and Southern Europeans. So the people are like, there's a big portion of that in Western Pennsylvania, big Polish presence. In the steel mills, a big Czech presence in parts of the state, but particularly Italians and Irish. But Italians especially, and Italians are old school Democratic voters going back generations.
My grandfather. Yeah,
exactly. And I think they're gonna trend heavier for Trump than any group. Entirely. I mean, those folks that were patrolling Fishtown, the old working class neighborhood that's becoming a hipster neighborhood, unfortunately, was the oldest continuous working class neighborhood in the entire country. Had been working class since the 1600s. But when the riots started happening in Philly, the old school folks in Fishtown were busy policing the local neighborhood with their bats and walking around old school, looked like something out of the 1970s. So that vote is trending heavy Trump too. But that voter group, they just miss in the polls at a bad level. Now, particularly for whatever reason, you see North Central Pennsylvania, they just can't track. They
don't hear. Let me show it again. They don't want to talk, man. They don't want to do it. They just
don't pick up polls.
Look at this, guys. Look at this.
And for people who want to understand what's happening in the media, they're going to have people around State College, Penn State, one of the highest professional class areas in the state. They're going to list some of those people as rural. So their rural representative voter is not going to be the guy up in Forest County, not far from Warren.
That's happening to us. It is.
It is. It's the nature of it. That's why, unless you're adjusting for it, and I don't believe any of these pollsters are adjusting for it. That's why I think they'll have an even bigger miss. I think 2020. That's why they
get those. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying, I think 2020 is going to beat 1948, which was hard, by the way. People forget. Not only did they not a single poll predict Truman was going to win. Now, it was almost only Gallup polling then, of course. They on average estimated a 7-point win for Dewey, and he lost by 9, so it was off by 16 points.
At the last minute, they gave Dewey they took 2 points off of Dewey, and Dewey. I think their final
late
was
October
+5. Yeah. But the whole time it was a rout. It was a rout.
Oh, completely. It was never going to be competitive.
Yeah.
Whereas if you understood who Truman's voter was, but what it was, that was the biggest class divide in American politics until I think this election. To give people an idea, the difference between the best way to map out an area about which way it may be trending is look at the percentage of people that just have a high school degree versus people that have at least a post-college degree.
Yes.
The more post-college degrees, the more it's trending towards the Democrats. The more high school degrees, it's trending Trumpish. The biggest group they miss in the polls is they undersample high school degree voters, and they're combining them with some college voters. And the thing is that that can be misleading because the high school voter can be some of Trump's strongest voter group, and is your core of the working class. And then on the college, they're inflating the post college portion, because if you break it out, you'll see, like I did a deep dive into Pew's partisan affiliation data since 2016 in all of their polls, and Pew, to their credit, are very transparent about information.
Yeah, I got to give it to them. They are.
So even though they're a left-leaning pollster and a left-leaning media institution and foundation, that you can get good internal data from them. And what's fascinating is almost all the movement for Democrats is amongst post-college.
That's right.
If you factor out just college, particularly if you could get rid of your Ivy League colleges, your prestigious private university colleges, if you were just looking at people who graduated from State U, State U is actually slightly trending Republican. Your higher end private college is slightly trending Democrat, but all the real trending is post college. And whereas high school voters are trending heavily Republican, like right now, but like Trini pointed it out, but he could have gone into more detail. The gap between a high school voter and a post college voter throughout the 90s and 2000s was in the single digits.
That's right.
That grew to double digits under Trump. It's looking at Pew's party affiliation data. You may have a gap between high school educated and post college voters of 50 points. That gives you an idea. That's never happened since Truman. So and we didn't have education back then, but we had other proxies for class that would have equated. And well, actually, it was around 40 points was my estimate. So Trump may be the biggest class divided election in American history. And it's across the board, by the way. He's trending very well amongst working class Black men, working class Hispanic men, working class white men, working class Southern, working class Northern, working class Western. It is a class-driven election, and polls have their biggest mistakes when they are in a class-divided election. And then you add to that the political bias of most pollsters and the polling community that governs pollsters effectively. I guess we'll call them the Nate Slimes of the world.
The Slimers.
I think of that little ghost from Ghostbusters.
That's what.
Maybe get somebody
exactly
to do a
what
meme.
I think.
have little going around sliming legitimate people.
Right.
Exactly. You know, stuffing his face with whatever it is. So I think it's the poll. I have zero confidence in the polls. And apparently the betting markets have very little confidence either, given that Trump is mostly staying between 45 and 50, depending on where you are. They're completely ignoring the Silvers and the Cohns and the Entons and the Morrises and the rest, who are still predicting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, who are still predicting, by the way, 70 to 95% chance of Trump victory.
And Marquette, they'll tell you their distribution too. And now I know where Marquette is getting these Biden +3s to Biden +6s. Here is, and this is another one. Wisconsin is another one I need to fill in before I feel comfortable enough. And it'll fill in by tonight, I'm sure. Here's Wisconsin. That look familiar? I mean, and actually mine's a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a little bit better, because often those northern ones, particularly those northern two outside Duluth and that northern one, and then the northern one in the center of the state, that's where they almost never poll. So by the way, they never get polling responses. So the northern and the western parts of the state are the real rural working class areas that trended heavy for Trump. Big Nordic populations in those parts of the state, some German Catholics thrown in, extremely anti-war. But to give people an idea, it was that northwestern part of Wisconsin that put McCarthy in the House and in the Senate back in the day.
Sure was.
Then flipped around and backed Dave Obey, a longtime populist Democrat from that part of the state. And it was the heart of Trump country in the 2016 presidential primaries. The eastern part of the state is very communitarian, very well connected. That's why you can see, even in the rural areas in the eastern part of the state, it's easier to get polling responses. The reason why Wisconsin was most oft is the part of Wisconsin that was skeptical amongst Republicans was the WOW suburbs outside of Milwaukee, and your communitarian. I call communitarian because they're really well connected. So Michael Barone made this point that if you found a place where people were really well connected to one each other, go to church, go to fraternal organizations, all that kind of jazz, that Trump did weaker there in Republican presidential primaries. He ended up doing fine in the general amongst those voters, but they're more the key to his election was what was happening in the west and northern parts of the state, and those people just tend not to vote. And they're much more populist historically. They backed Bob La Follette, put his Progressive Party on the map in the 19-teens and 1920s. People forget McCarthy started out as a blue-collar Democrat before he flipped over to being a Cold War Republican. But his focus was never on ordinary people being communist. His focus was on State Department. The reality is, if you go back and listen to a lot of what McCarthy said, it would sound like a deep state criticism today. It was all focused on high-ranking officials.
There's criminals in the State Department. There's traitors in the State Department. Yep.
Exactly. And the State Department was the epitome of elite power in the United States at that time. So, what the national security establishment is today is what the State Department was then. And actually there were obvious problems. The State Department did have high-ranking left Marxist in the State Department position that probably helped lead China going communist all the way back, because they understated the likelihood that Mao was going to win in China. And they likely did so deliberately in order to keep the U.S. from being involved. And to the degree the U.S. was involved, it was actually pro-Mao at times. So that part of the state that's the hardest to poll, the west and the north, is the part that it keeps skewing the Wisconsin polls towards the Democrats, and they get oversampling from that area, and oversampling from the urban east, from Madison. You see, and you can tell for folks that are looking at this, Democratic leaning constituencies can't wait to answer polls.
Yeah, they love it.
Republican leaning constituencies have no interest in responding for the most part, especially blue collar rural guys out in the pickup truck. They're not answering the phone for some pollster. And so it's you have to go to great lengths to get those people to respond. And once you get some responses, then you get much more accurate intel and information. And there's a huge gap between your college-educated voter living on the Wisconsin side of the Duluth border and your college-educated voter living in Madison.
And I just, want to point out too, in those Supreme Court elections where first Republicans did pretty well, and then they got creamed. That the incumbent conservative, whatever you want to call it, because they're not party affiliation folks, but everybody knows what side of the aisle each of the judicial candidates stand on, right? So out in the very northwest, you have two counties that I cared about a lot. So Ashland and Douglas started to really move away from Democrats in these last few elections. And that actually, with that last one, what was her name? Joe Karofsky, she just blew him out there in Ashland, and Douglas too, but really blew him out. I mean, it was a pretty decent swing. Trump was able to hold Hillary to like the light blue area, where I think Hillary got 52% in Douglas, or no, Ashland, she got 52.5%, and Trump got a little over 40. Right there, there's an old labor movement that was out there. So somebody like a Ted Cruz would get murdered up there.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, but somebody like Donald Trump is holding his own. And then if we need more of that though to fill in a little bit before I feel totally confident. But if you just take this distribution, and I'll tell people this: if you just take this distribution and you're looking at a tighter likely voter model, then you're looking at 48.5 for Donald Trump, 47.5 for Joe Biden. So a very close race that is a squeaker for Trump. If that trend holds. I just want to fill it out because you guys can see where we're missing here. All right. There's a lot of the story out there. However, the problem with Biden is that southwestern part of the state is just not. Is it going to get any better for him? What I mean?
It's not. And if Democrats had done if Republicans had done their job, they would have put up somebody to go after kind in that congressional district, because that congressional district is waiting to flip.
Yeah, I agree.
But unfortunately, they put up nobody of consequence, at least that I'm aware of.
It was like a lot of House seats.
They paid no attention to Colin Peterson, even in 2018. I mean, that was a sign that Minnesota was switching. That Colin Peterson, the rural West guy that was intensely locally popular, was in trouble. And he almost lost to a guy who had like $200,000 in total spending. I mean, he was outspent like 20-1. And he only won by 3 points in a Democratic sweep election. I mean, that's why his seat is gone. Even Cook Political Report is admitting his seat is gone. And when I was telling people, it's like that was reminding me like what I saw in 2010 in Appalachia in the South. I mean, the most ancient base of the Democratic Party since 1828, when it was formed for Andrew Jackson, was that reverse L you get from eastern Oklahoma through Tennessee, up through Kentucky and the Black Hole Country, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. That had been the Democratic congressional base for forever. And when they started losing those seats in 2010, I was like, wow, something is starting to really realign politically. And it took Trump to ultimately manifest. To make it a reality. But I see the same thing happening in large parts of the northern working class. Well, Pennsylvania should not have picked up voter registration should not have trended by 2 points in Pennsylvania towards Republicans in just 4 years. That's the most pro-Republican trend in that state in its history of voter registration available public data. And if you look at where it's happening all in the rural working class parts of the state. You're seeing a realignment. Like people were asking me last time why I talked about Forest County, given it's a small county and has leaned Republican for many cycles. I said it's because it's the most pure working class county demographically in the state. And the best example of that is between 2012 and 2016, Trump ran 23 points ahead of where Romney did in March. So it told you what those voters did in the rest of the state, where there was more counterbalancing some middle class, some upper middle class voters in other constituencies. But I think Wisconsin is not going to be I think Trump is going to be in much better stead in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Pennsylvania than he is in Michigan.
Yeah.
And
you're right.
And Wisconsin, for folks out there, almost 2/3 small town. So only a third of the vote comes from counties that have more than 100,000 votes. And that's
let me show that again. Let me show that. That's why that is so important, Robert, because out in the Southwest, in the western central part of the state, even in the North, I need more in the North, just to fill the picture out.
Because it's such a key swing. However, the North goes
important. Yeah.
Like in Tennessee, like in Pennsylvania, I use Forest County to figure out where the working class vote's going in the state.
Yep.
And in Tennessee, I used a little county called Moore County, which is about 30 minutes from my hometown in Chattanooga. It's where they make Jack Daniels, Lynchburg. It's a tiny
God
little
bless them.
It's got if more than 2 people get arrested, they're in trouble because they only have a jail cell for one. It's that kind of small county. But it's the biggest swing populous county in the state. So you don't look at it so much for who they vote for, but how much they swing between an election, and it will tell you how the working class vote and the rest of the state's going to vote. So it's one of those places that if I just have somebody stop by Lynchburg and Moore County and talk to folks at diners and bars, I'll have a pretty good sense of what's going to happen through the rest of the state. That's the way northwestern Wisconsin are. There's a little bit of the Fox River Valley that was key for Scott Walker. That's less key for Trump. Because Trump's vote is the populist vote from the North and the West.
Yeah, and this would, you know what? While you were bringing it up too, you're talking about Peterson. Let's look at Minnesota. Where are you, Minnesota? Again, and I will tell people the raw top lines here as we go, but it doesn't mean it can't change, and it will change. But I'm just telling you where we're at right now. Here's Minnesota's distribution, Robert. What did I miss?
Yeah, so it's just the North.
It's pretty important, right?
Yes, yes, it is. And basically, it's the heart of it's the rural part, and small town part of the Iron Range is half of that vote. And the other half is the concentration of Norwegians in the state, because the Norwegians are Fargo up on the western part of the state is where you have your highest concentration of Norwegians. That's like Norman County is a little bit north of Fargo. That's one of the biggest Norwegian counties in the state. But by ancestry, and that was the most pro-trending. On average, Trump ran 20 points ahead in counties or precincts that had a heavy Norwegian ancestry compared to Romney in 2012. So it was like the Forest County of Minnesota. There's both fracking and iron, of course, in the Iron Range. So it's that. I mean, if that Survey USA poll, which I think overall was wrong, but what it was tracking from the Iron Range was crazy numbers. I mean, it was talking about Trump winning by 35 to 40 points in the Iron Range. And the Iron Range, basically, for those that don't know, split their votes. It ended up, Hillary probably came up with a slight edge because of how much she got out of Duluth.
St. Louis, I can actually give you some insight in there if you want.
Because that's going to be key. And then the rural North is going to be the other place where Trump needs to put up huge numbers, which he probably will if he's going to prevail.
Yeah, I wanted to know, about we talked about it. Look, you probably know better than I do. I got yelled at the other day. I'm calling St. Louis. People are like, it's Louis. I'm not from Minnesota. Right. I don't know, man.
I don't know how they... I don't know how they pronunciate it, because the western part of Fargo is where you get from the movie Fargo and the TV show Fargo, those accents, those heavy.
Bobby?
Yeah, exactly. So
remember Bobby's World?
Yes, exactly.
Love that show.
Oh, it's great. And the accents are funny as the dickens. A mayor that got arrested recently in that part of the state, for going after police officers, but he had a little bit of the same accent, which is funny. But yeah, that part of the state is really Trump's base, and particularly if the Iron Range is trending heavy. And when I look at Minnesota polls, I look at the internals. I particularly look at places where they have a sufficient sample size. So I'll look at the Iron Range and the Twin Cities, and I'll see if Biden is hitting the numbers he needs to hit there. And like that's where the Survey USA poll, even though it showed Biden up 7, I looked at the internals and said this is a disaster for them. Because he's running behind what he needed out of the Twin Cities and way behind what he needed in the North. So what the poll told me is that they didn't get a good rural sample size in the rest of Minnesota.
Which, and explain to people, they would stop right now, guys. Let me explain.
Yes, completely.
They would have this distribution and they would say, all right, we're done. And they would wrap it up. The same is true with Wisconsin. And the same is true with Pennsylvania. I'm going to try for a little bit more in Pennsylvania, Robert, but if we have to go with that, we have to go with that. In Iowa, because we're missing the North, which would hurt Trump if we did stop there. But, it is what it is. But in Duluth, I think we got probably a better distribution than the recent polls did. It's just that it's very important to know what is going to happen in the rest of those counties up there. So, Uchaching, whatever, Beltrami.
The real base for Trump is the rural part of the Iron Range. I mean,
Rose Lake of the Woods. Yeah,
he just wants to hold his own in Duluth. If he can hold his own in Duluth and then pad his numbers by 20, 30, 40 points in the rural parts, then he wins the Iron Range. And then he just needs to hold his own in the Twin Cities, and the rest of the state doesn't even have to improve at all, because just getting a big enough vote for him out of the Iron Range will be enough he needs basically 20,000 votes to flip to him, because he lost by about 40,000. So he just needs 20,000 voters to switch sides, and he can get that just out of the Iron Range. If the data from the Iron Range and some of these other surveys is accurate, he's already there. So then he just needs the Twin Cities to not create a bigger Democratic margin than it did for Hillary.
And again, they really think people really think that Trump is going to win. I should have pointed this out in all these surveys. So people think he's going to win. So even in some of the areas where he's not doing well, they still think, and by pretty significant margins. In the sample with this distribution that we're showing people right here, if you look at that again, that tight likely voter screen, which I'm not going to do, man. I'm not going to do it. I feel like that can come a little bit later, like later in October or something, but for now, if you look at just these voters, I lost it for a second. I don't want to say something that's not dead on accurate. Let me pull it up again. And what I mean by that is that they're certain to vote. All right. These are, certain voters that are going to go out. We know they're going to go out. He's got a 4-point lead in this distribution among those voters that are absolutely, we know. And if we give Biden some more peripheral voters, then he does better, and that's it. I mean, then we're looking at a really tight, tight race.
A 4-point win would not surprise me at all out of Minnesota. It's just the Iron Range is swinging so heavy, and I think that all the riots,
47. 51, 40, 46.9, actually. 51, even 46.9. Yeah.
If he net wins out of the Iron Range, then I don't think Biden will. I think Biden will lose votes out of the Twin City suburbs. So I think because of all the riots, I think he'll run below what Hillary's margin was. I think turnout in Minneapolis proper is going to be down in terms of the urban core, particularly in the African American precincts in Minneapolis. So I think when you combine those factors, him winning by 2 or 3 points there would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, he is. I mean, with hardcore Minneapolis in there, he's just, he's about 16 points below. Or no, I'm sorry. Excuse me. So 50. What did she win by? Let me get this margin in the Twin City burbs before hold on. Let me make sure. Can't be 16, but it's a significant amount. So, and Trump is getting about 4% more than he got last time. So
that's all he just needs to hold water there, because I think the combined rural parts of the state and the flip in the Iron Range give him the state as long as he doesn't run below his Minneapolis 2016 margins. So by everything, I think a combination of increased votes and turnout trends will favor him in there. I think he'll run a couple of points ahead net in terms of margin of votes due to both turnout and vote shifting in the Twin City suburbs. And I think he'll run behind Hillary's where he ran in 2016 in the Twin Cities, but I think turnout will be down. So I think the net effect will be he should win Minnesota by 1 to 2 points.
Yeah, if this holds, we're looking at again in Duluth. Hillary Clinton won Duluth last time by, where are we here? St. Louis, right? St. Louis, whatever you want to call it. 51.4 to 39.7. Right there, right now. It's about even. So if that really is the case, and I'm talking about people who just their city is Duluth. Right. So that's not the entire county. So no, exactly. I got to be honest with you, Robert. I think it's going. St. Louis is going to go. If he's 50-50 in Duluth, then St. Louis County is going to go. It's going to go.
Once I saw they have both fracking and iron has done great because of the steel tariffs that Trump imposed on China to stop the dumping. And so the iron mines are back. And almost nobody in Minnesota predicted it or saw it coming. So once you saw 6 different Democratic mayors come out and publicly endorse Trump at a time period when it looked like Trump has no chance to win, at least in the public polls in Minnesota, that told you that the Iron Range was going coal mining country. And so like coal mining countries, people forget West Virginia used to be the most Democratic state in the country.
Right?
I mean,
Bill Clinton,
1988,
it was down there.
Voted for Dukakis by massive margins. I mean, it was Al Gore deciding, and the Democrats deciding to join the environmental movement and crush the United States. And you look at places where the energy, which is fracking in particular in the upper Midwest, it's why parts of Ohio has fracking, big parts of Ohio has fracking, Pennsylvania has fracking. Now, this is another reason why Michigan is not as competitive. Michigan will lean more, it has far less fracking employment than Minnesota or Pennsylvania.
Support for it is less than in Minnesota and Pennsylvania, no doubt. Fracking is like 20 points support in Minnesota. It's big. It may even be bigger than Pennsylvania. I got to double check that. But
I think you're going to see a 20-point swing in the Iron Range toward Trump. And what that does is that net effect gives him the state as long as he holds his own everywhere else. And I think he'll go up in the rural areas, slightly down in the Minneapolis urban core, but I think it'll be slightly up in the suburbs. And then turnout will favor him. I think you'll see higher turnout of voters in the Iron Range for Trump than you'll see in the Minneapolis core for Biden compared to 2016.
This may be why he's doing so much better than he did last time against Hillary Clinton, especially in the Twin Cities. In the entire state, policing and crime is now, I guess if it's like at 9, then in Minnesota, the top issue, policing and crime is running like 6 or 7 points ahead of other states in Minnesota. So it could be, and I didn't double check Wisconsin. I'm curious about that because of Kenosha now, but Minnesota took the brunt of this entire start. And those voters are they're breaking very, very heavily for Donald Trump. I just looked right now. I just looked at Duluth. So I just did that live. So I'm actually a little bit more shocked. So St. Louis would go. And if he keeps that, also the Survey USA poll, let me just bring up this distribution again. Olmsted County, Trump has a 2.5-point lead in Olmsted County. So I don't know what they meant when they said the South. And I said, that was the one county Hillary hung on to. Now that's within the margin. Maybe it goes for Biden.
My guess is what Survey USA do. That they fudge those numbers when they don't get a good sample is my hunch. So they just say, we're just going to put these voters that are overlap suburban and other voters, we'll call it the South. And it was a giveaway that because their internals otherwise were negative for Biden.
Very
underperforming in the Twin Cities.
So you think Ramses and Hennepin are the South?
Yeah, I think part of it is. But
that's crazy, man.
Is because they probably couldn't get enough people. I mean, the way Survey USA polls, they poll quickly. They use a combination of IVR and online, depending on how they're doing it. And it can just be tricky if you're polling over 2 or 3 days. Those small towns, for people that don't know, I mean, basically, the other thing, giveaway, by the way, is they had the Twin Cities being 62% of the vote in the state, and they're not.
No. It's not.
It's about half.
32%.
Well, themselves, even if you include all of the counties around them as suburban, and for people that don't know, this is true in Wisconsin as well. A lot of even parts of outside Philly, parts of Montgomery and Bucks County are actually still rural. There's parts that are very suburban, but you go to the northern tip and you get a different dynamic. I figured this out when I was tracking the 7-Eleven coffee cup poll. because I was like, why do they get these weird numbers out of Montgomery? And I figured out, the northern part of Montgomery County is actually this small townish, like it's still agricultural, and they're all getting Trump cups. Now they don't matter for the population of Montgomery County, but it gives you an idea that you don't always get the exact dynamic. In Minneapolis is the same way. Well, outside Milwaukee is Zalke counties, half of it's rural, half of it's suburban. The same is true in Minneapolis. There are some of those suburban counties that are not all suburban. They're still small townish and
That's right. Yes. Yeah. That's why we talk about this a lot, and we're the only ones who are doing it. Suburbia is difficult to define, folks, and that's why we use postal codes all the time to do. And this is we get longitude, latitude for geo, and postal codes, cities. We want to know your city because it's all got to match up. It's all got to match up. By the way, as we've been on this show, I just did the last hour and a half, right? So 27 responses came in from Minneapolis. I don't even want to say what they are because it's only 27 responses, but it's absolutely stunning. Do you want to know?
Sure.
All right. It's 40.7 Donald Trump, 48.1 Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and then Howie Hawkins took one, and Joe Jorgensen took one, and undecided took one. So all in all, there's about 11 for Donald Trump and Mike Pence and 13 for Joe Biden. That is just the city of Minneapolis. It could change. I'm just saying It's funny because we're talking about it, right? And it will change.
But Minnesota is a state that could just collapse for Democrats because of the combination.
He was at 32, 33 in that entire area. So it really isn't that far off. It's just that it's specifically Minneapolis. So, and it's a small sample, so you would expect to really be like 70-30 Joe Biden. You would expect that. But,
yes.
We'll wait. We'll let it go. We'll let it do its thing.
The reason why Minnesota could really even more heavily swing is because a combination of the Iron Range economics that are so favorable to Trump,
right?
And the second being the Minneapolis riots. The worst of that. There was the best of Trump economics has been Minnesota in the Iron Range. The worst of Democratic urban policy has been Minneapolis in the Twin Cities.
I just showed that just so everyone didn't think I was full of shit. Right? I'm not kidding. I had to put it up. There it is, right there. Like I said, I just did the last hour and 20 minutes, and that's what came in the last hour and 20 minutes. It is no joke that close.
Unlike 2018, you notice that Nate Cohn is not sharing all the internal details he did of Sienna's polling.
That's interesting.
Which tells you there's something in there that looks bad for him or his position, because his whole thing was maximum transparency. For people who don't know, Nate Cohn does the uptake at the New York Times.
Yeah, which I like that he does that typically.
Yes. He has his biases, a strong pro-democratic biases, but he was one of the main people to point out exit polls were useless. One of the main people to point out educational attainment weighting was necessary, though he only did that after the 2016 election, really. People like me were pointing it out to him. People like Doug Johnson were pointing it out to him after I brought it up to Doug Johnson. But he did massive congressional House race polling in 2018 that ended up mostly holding up. And
it wasn't bad at all.
And they were willing to bear the brunt of massive expense to try to get meaningful cross-section sampling. There was some geographic limitations to what he did, but otherwise it was pretty good. This cycle, somehow he's not doing that kind of polling. And he released all the internal data, which he's not doing this cycle. And maybe because, I highlighted that his presidential poll that he had done, national presidential poll, assumed that basically 25% of the voters were going to be new voters. If you factored them out, then his polling was actually showing a dead heat. So maybe that's why. But he's not releasing a lot of the internal data to the same degree that he did in the past, which means Sienna must be coming with results he doesn't like.
So just to give I'm just going to do this to give people an idea of what I'm talking about. All right. So if you include people with the odds less than 50-50 turning out to vote, okay, and are less than extremely or very enthusiastic. Oops, I just killed it, but I'll put it up again. There was more votes over the last hour and 20 minutes. There were more responses. And give me a second. I want to show people the difference, because this is why it matters when you ask, when you have a likely voter model and you're not just polling this crazy percentage of the population that may or may not show up. So in total, 48 came in from, this is just Minneapolis. All right. And now you look at Trump's margin, it's still an increase from 2016. And again, very small sample. There's 48 there. All right. You could see he's at like 31 and change, and Biden's at like 62 and a half. Now that's more like you, but again, you have to give Biden voters that are less than 50% likely to show up. So where we may be in real life, 58-35, you know what I mean? 58-35. That's not good enough for him,
That was
man.
the 2004, 2012 problem for Kerry in 2004, Romney in 2012, that you had to include moderate propensity voters for them to be leading. Yeah. And that if you looked at just people pay, like one measurement is that I always used was, are you paying a lot of attention?
A lot of attention.
A lot of attention. Whoever has won that, by the way, whoever's voters are winning the a lot of attention question have won every election that question's been polled, and Trump has the biggest margin with that group of anyone ever at this point. So I like extreme enthusiasm better.
Me too.
Because there's a lot of reasons, and to make it race specific. So like when they ask, are you extremely enthusiastic about the election, you're going to get different numbers than if you say, are you extremely enthusiastic about the presidential election?
Yeah.
And there, by the way, we're seeing the smallest class gap in enthusiasm I've ever seen.
We ask specifically about the president. We do.
Yep. And that's the way to do it. And there you're seeing Trump's numbers are off the chart, and you're seeing a class gap that's unusually low. So for people that don't know, usually that whatever that gap is, usually ends up modeling the gap that the census finds in voter turnout after the election. So like usually the gap is about 5 to 6 points between white and black voters. Usually it's about 15 points between white non-Hispanic voters and Hispanic voters. And usually it's upwards of 20 points between white college and white non-college.
Yeah.
Right now, that white college to non-college gap is almost non-existent. So that's usually a strong indicator that you're going to see a surge of turnout amongst working class whites. And you're going to see a decline of turnout of African Americans, and particularly Black African American Democratic leaning voters and Hispanic Democratic leaning voters. The Republican ones are going to get out to vote, and that's how like Trump can go from say 8% to 12% in a black precinct. It can just be that the black voters drop off.
That's right. That's
what happened in 2016. By the way, mostly he improved amongst black men, but mostly it was a bunch of black men did not turn out who had turned out for Obama in 2012.
And interestingly, Robert, if you add like that last one I did, that was moderately. And then if you add slightly or none at all, this is something that would send off a red flag for me, which you heard Bernie Sanders on the Sunday shows this weekend because of this. If you include slightly and not at all, it's no different than including moderately. So Joe Biden's voters are not, they're just not amped at all. And there's no difference between, I'm moderately enthusiastic or I'm not at all enthusiastic. There's in his support, what it does to the results. Like if I included all of them, it still wouldn't change the margin. What changes it is when you're just looking at extremely and very. And then when you add moderately, then it'll shrink Trump's margin a little bit, but it does nothing after that. So if you add not at all, it's the point is they just aren't enthusiastic for him at all. It doesn't. So I'm trying to widen the electorate, I'm trying to, and it doesn't. My point is, it doesn't help him.
And here's where there can be a Rust Belt Southwest overlap. A fair number of the older voters and retirees in Arizona and Nevada came from the Midwest.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why there's direct flights between Milwaukee and Phoenix, folks.
Mm-hmm.
One of the few places there is direct flights. Milwaukee almost flies nowhere direct, but it flies to Phoenix direct. And it's because of all the Wisconsinites down in Arizona. And there's a fair number of that overlap in Nevada. And I was curious, Nevada is great because it will track age and party registration data. And so I'd had an ongoing debate with John Ralston out here in Nevada about whether he was saying it was going to trend several points Democratic in voter registration by election day. And I was saying no. So, of course, he blocked me as his answer.
That's the greatest way,
Yeah, the great celebrated John Ralston. He's the most celebrated election analyst in Nevada. It's a joke. He can read early voting. Congratulations.
Good job.
Exactly. And by the way, that's a thing for everybody to pay attention
to. Which is an easier state to read. Some of them are not easy and mean nothing, like North Carolina.
Oh, exactly. In fact, I would say this cycle, it's going to be
Absolutely
it's going to be
worthless.
so skewed. I
Yep.
would pay no attention to early voting data
Yep.
because Democrats are all going to vote by mail as much as possible. Republicans are going to vote at the lowest rate of voting by mail they've ever voted by in terms of early voting. They may get out for early voting in person, but otherwise it's going to be all in-person voting. Because of what's happening politically. But the reason why Nevada is flat, in other words, Nevada leaned 5 points Democratic by voter registration in 2016, still does in 2020. And in Nevada, we have two right-leaning independent parties that are big, both the Libertarians and the American Independent Party. When you include those from an ideological perspective in 2016, it was about even between right and left parties. Right now in 2020, it's even between right and left parties. The reason for that, given millennials and Zoomers and Latinos are, and particularly amongst millennials and Zoomers, are increasingly registering and thus leaning the state Democratic in general, is the massive swing amongst voters over 45. There has been almost double-digit swing toward the Republicans in voter registration in Nevada amongst white non-Hispanics over the age of 45. And that's a voter group that is much more likely to vote than is younger millennials and Zoomers. And when you add to that the enthusiasm gap that already exists, you can see what's going to happen. And what it does is a lot of those voters are the same voters sort of group-wise as the voters you're getting in the upper Midwest, because many of them have ancestral ties to the upper Midwest. It also suggests Arizona's not as competitive as people think, that it'll still lean Trump. That whatever vote Trump gets, he'll get 2 to 3 points more out of Arizona than he gets throughout the country. That's still less.
Somebody was talking about that before, Kelly North. But look, Kelly, I don't have any polling in Arizona, so that's why I'm not. Because people are like, well, I want to know about Maricopa. Well, I'm not polling Maricopa, so I don't know. You know,
what
I
you
can
can
only
say
tell
is
you.
Voter registration in Maricopa over the summer leaned Republican rather than Democrat.
It did. It did. That just came out, actually. That's true. And they what was that net? 15,000 or something was a net or something.
Exactly. And the key to that for people that don't know is, I mean, Maricopa is increasingly amongst its millennials and Zoomers Hispanic. So I can almost guarantee that the new voter registrations for people who had never registered before and people under the age of 35 was disproportionately Democratic in Maricopa. So what that means is people, just like what's happening in Las Vegas and Nevada, white non-Hispanics over 45, many of whom have upper Midwestern ties ancestrally, are disproportionately voting, registering Republican, which means that that's where Trump is going to be able to. But what people always forgot is there's always a polarity. You know, the old physics rule that there's always an equal and opposite reaction to any action.
Absolutely, it's not a vacuum. It is not a vacuum.
The mere fact that Sheriff Joe almost came back and won was a sign that the increasing Mexican American and immigrant sensitive vote that's Democratic leaning in Arizona is causing older voters to shift to being more Republican. And so that's right. Yeah, exactly. That's what happened mostly in Florida to a large degree. The more certain constituencies grew Democratic, the more other constituencies grew more Republican, and those constituencies growing more Republican were twice as big as the ones growing Democratic. And so Arizona won't be as Trumpish as it was in 2016, when I think it was about 5.5 points more pro-Trump than the country. But I think it'll be more like 2.5, but still enough for him to safely win.
Rochester, by the way, Justin Rochester. We got a nice sample in Rochester. That's Olmsted.
That's Minnesota. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just wanted to tell people, because that county is so important, right? Because we're going back to that Survey USA
only
poll.
County in that part of the state that Hillary was able to hold.
That she was, and Rochester is the Democrat area. That's where they gotta win like 60-40 guys to keep because the rest of the county will come in heavy for Trump. So they have to win 60-40 to be able to keep Olmsted from going light pink. All right. And it is 51.5 Biden, 44 Trump in Rochester. So when the rest of the county comes in,
gonna flip, then
it's going to flip. I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you. And I understand
that's why he needed a huge vote out of Minneapolis to change what was happening.
He's not going to get it.
No, yeah, he needed to run double digits ahead of where Hillary did.
I am getting to the point, and this again is why, and Minnesota is for people who don't know, it's a very high participation state. Them in New Hampshire are like always
state in the country. 75%
every damn year. Yep, 75. So it's like these people who are telling us that they're maybe not going to vote. I don't like, these are overwhelmingly Democratic voters. They lean Democrat. Their profile is a Democrat, likely Democrat voter. And I just don't see them, because it's such a high participation state. The undecided level is small. So if they're not going to show up now, if they haven't decided, exactly. I don't think they're gonna, man. I think we've pegged down the electorate. We know what it's gonna look like, and they better mail some ballots in. That's it.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I'm not kidding, man.
And it's going to be trickier in Minnesota because of everything that it's harder to steal votes. You need for a Democratic Party to successfully steal votes, or any party to successfully steal votes, you need an old political machine that has a lot of that in a vote-rich environment. So they have that in Pennsylvania with Philadelphia. Democratic governor, Philadelphia political machine, long history of stealing votes, very vote-rich. They have it in Michigan with Detroit. They don't really have it in Wisconsin. Milwaukee doesn't have that same history. And they don't have it really at all in Minnesota. So that's going to be their problem.
Just to tell people, want to be transparent here. See, here's city is Rochester. This is Minnesota, and you could see it's a large sample. I mean, that's it's a large sample. I mean, we're not going off of a couple hundred people here. This is bad news. This is bad news.
Very bad news for Biden. Yes,
very bad news.
The fact that he was sending people to Minnesota and he's scheduled to go there meant that their internals looked very bad.
Ugly. 51.7, Robert. 51.7.
And I don't think there's anything you can do to fix it.
At this stage, right? That's my point, right? So Joe Jorgensen's taking 3.2 in Rochester. Howie Hawkins is taking 1.5, right? And in our sample, that broke down to 62 votes and 25 votes because we're talking about a nice year.
My hunch, by the way, about some of the Jorgensen vote coming out of urban centers of any kind is that some of that is a shy Trump voter parking his vote with somebody safe.
You may be right.
It is my hunch. Right. My hunch is that Jorgensen will run about half of what the polls show in urban centers, and that vote will show up disproportionately as Trump on election day. Because it like, let's say you're a shy Trump voter, but you can't say that you're going to vote for Biden. It drives you nuts. But you want to just a place to, and this is why, for example, people have noted in 4-way polling versus 2-way polling, you can get different reactions and different response rates. But my hunch is that some of the libertarian, I thought this was happening in 2016 too. I thought some of the people saying they were going to vote Gary Johnson were just parking their Trump vote. But I think it's going to be more intense this cycle. So I'm monitoring Jorgensen's vote, particularly when they're running ahead of the libertarian norm. So the Gary Johnson was different, big national notoriety, and obviously was going to be big in New Mexico. But I think that as much as a half of the net, I think Jorgensen will run about half of where she's showing in these urban areas, or even as low as a third of where she's showing. But I think it's part because if you're a shy Trump voter, you can just park your vote with Jorgensen.
And I want to, I want to put this comment up here because this is a point that we really need to make. And you're talking about these kinds of people. I bet you when I look on MarketSite and we look deeply into Joe Jorgensen's numbers, you're probably right about that. Look at what Robert Garcia, his comment, because there are these people, members of my own family who voted Trump, totally turned by COVID. Okay. There are those people. This is what I'm trying to explain, though. The 2016 coalition for Donald Trump is not the 2020 coalition. There are some people that he's juicing, like the Iron Range. We're trying to stress before, there are some parts of the country where he's probably going to do a little worse, you know? And then there are other areas like St. Louis, which apparently he is going to carry. I'm like really stunned by that. Cook is so small. It's hard to gauge, I don't know.
I mean, the big one, the vote-rich one, is St. Louis County, and so
it is.
You're talking about a 20-point reversal there, effectively. I mean, I think he's going to win it by 8 to 10 points when he lost it by 12 in 2016. So, and I think turnout's going to be juiced there. I think it'll be disproportionately higher than. I think it will turn out there will be up, while turnout in Minneapolis core will be down. And so I think that dynamic is what's driving it. Now, I think there are some. But here's the other thing with the COVID issue. It's just fading. There's just fewer and fewer people that are motivated by COVID.
Healthcare overtook it again. Yep. Healthcare, it's falling.
It's just declining. As the hospitalization rates collapse, as the death rates collapse. And to give an example, what's happening here in Nevada. Trump is advertising on COVID related to the lockdown. So that's where the demographics have shifted. If a state like Nevada is showing that, hey, by the way, we're more worried about a lockdown than we are about COVID, and it's a Democratic-leaning state to begin with, that tells you where voters are overall. So for every nursing personality type, school teacher personality type that is still upset about COVID, that still blames Trump for COVID, there's twice as many blue-collar and small business types that are much more paranoid about what Joe Biden's going to do.
That's my point. And especially in Minneapolis, the Twin City burbs, the Twin Cities in general, it's 32% of the vote, folks, 32%. In some of these polls I'm looking at in Pennsylvania, Robert, they got the suburban vote at like 55%. The suburban vote is like 48, 46%, 48 is a good point. But the point is like that could shift the result quite a bit. And especially since those are not the voters who are the most juiced. And the Trump campaign was saying about like a week ago, and I read a quote from somebody who went in the Salt Lake Tribune, and they were saying, you know what, you don't understand. There were in 2018, there were all these white working class that just stayed home, and those are our guys. And I'm like, that sounds like a lot of horse crap to me, because that's what the losers sound like. But I looked at it, and it's absolutely true. And their whole game plan it was like 250,000 men alone. And their game plan was to get these voters out. It's apparently working because they are the most juiced voter. They're going to vote, man. They're going to vote. Well, and that's why I really would love to see the rest of the northern part of that state. Here's Minnesota again, folks. We got Duluth, but I didn't get, what are some of those areas up there?
Heavily. I mean, you have a bit of an Indian reservation, Indian casino up there, but on the eastern side is the rest of the Iron Range, and on the western side is heavily Norwegian and Finnish and Swedish. And we're huge Trump trending counties in 2016.
Beltrami, right. Didn't get hardly anything from there.
Because of Trump keeping his promises on, I'll give him credit, whether he timed it or not, knowing Trump, he probably did, announcing all these peace deals at the in the fall, while you're also announcing troop withdrawals. Is a perfect combination for that voter group. He's going to get some of the voters may not even say they're going to vote Trump, but but their behavior tells you they're going to vote
they're
Trump.
Going to. Yeah. And by the way, in any other election cycle, what he did with Serbia over there with kidding? When I was in college, that was impossible, Robert. Impossible. Bill Clinton was really screwing it up.
That's the Balkans. I mean, the two areas that have caused the most international conflict are the Balkans and the Mideast. And Trump has got record-setting peace deals in both parts of the world.
Yeah. And it's apparently more to come, too, from what I hear. Apparently more to come.
I think that behind the scenes, and maybe Kushner succeeded in this respect, they've cut a deal with Saudi Arabia, because for UAE and Bahrain, I think it's pronounced, to both be on board usually means Saudi Arabia is on board. It means Saudi Arabia is going to recognize Israel, and there's going to be a big peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, is my hunch. And my hunch is it's coming. I
think you're on the track there. I think that's
why he protected that prince for whacking that guy in
Sorry,
Turkey.
I don't mean to laugh.
But
Khashoggi.
I can't be too sympathetic. If you're completely
that was a spook who wrote for the Washington
he was a
Post.
Spook, totally a spook, a pro-war spook. But the other thing is, how dumb. I mean, at some level, that's a Darwin Award winner. I mean, you go into the embassy of the guy who you're trying to overthrow, and then you're shocked you get killed. I mean, come on. I mean, it's Saudi Arabia. This would be like walking into Stalin, being like Leon Trotsky, flying to Moscow and saying, "How are you, Joseph?"
But he had that kind of shows you, and this will get me in trouble, but it kind of shows you the hubris of this class, because he had a lot of friends in the Washington Post, a lot of friends in the New York Times, and he probably figured,
and the CIA, the deep state apparatus,
and he figured they're not going to touch me. I'm blah, 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 and I'm friends with blah, blah, blah. And he just decided to make a fatal error because he thought he could. I mean, I don't think people, voters, everyday voters, understand how many spooks and deep state hacks really do work in American media. Like, just a couple of months ago, I was in DC at one of my favorite little dive bars in the Heights, right? Which is because I'm Italian and Greek, and my wife is Italian and Spanish. So this couple that owns this Marxist bar, I mean, it's named after Marxism. All right, but I love it because the greatest food. they combine Spanish and Greek cooking, but they also make great drinks. So I love it. It's a dive. Somebody showed me years ago. I love it. And I'm sitting at the table, and somebody's recognizing me, comes over, and I didn't know his name, but I had never met him before, right? He's a spook for the Wall Street. He works for the Wall Street Journal, but he's a spook. I don't think people understand. They're not really the Moscow bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. Okay.
No.
Like that is a fraud. Like people don't understand that, Robert. They don't. Because I didn't really know until I got into this business, like, deeper, years ago. Like, I didn't know that, and I even went to college for this stuff. So, like it just doesn't, you don't realize it until you're in it. And then, God, you can't believe a word that comes out of this person's mouth. And you never know which side they're really on, because even though they're supposed to be spooks for us, and pose as journalists overseas, you don't know whether they've been compromised. Half of the stuff that these people have reported are garbage. It's not true. They're just pushing stuff.
Exactly. I think the anti-war vote is very Trump friendly throughout the upper Midwest because of what's happening, and the peace deals only amplify that.
Yeah.
And I think the trade issue will favor him.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
And the combination of trade and energy is what puts them in very good stead in Minnesota and Pennsylvania.
They hate NAFTA, man. They hate it.
Trade and anti-war in Wisconsin. The hurdle is in Michigan because of Biden's because there's less of an energy vote in there. There is a big trade vote, but it's a mixed effect because even though Biden's been terrible on trade, he is seen as the savior of the auto industry 10 years ago. So that's
we're currently at 16% support for keeping NAFTA.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Exactly. It's that bad.
Now, any results out of like Macomb and Monroe yet out of Michigan? Because those will be counties to watch. If Biden to win Michigan, Biden just needs to overperform there by 5 to 10, and the rest of the state stays steady. Because I think there'll be a drop off in votes in Wayne. I think there'll be a bigger drop off than there was. Well, there'll be a continued drop off from 2012 to 2016. There'll be another drop off in the black precincts in Wayne County in 2020 is my guess. So that's why Biden needs to make up the rest of that vote. I think he'll lose some more out of the rural vote up north. So
I'm shocked here in Macomb. I'm just looking as you're talking. Wow, he's doing well in Macomb County. It's small. Yeah, it's a small sample, but
that's going to be the issue.
I'd rather be him than Biden.
Is the conflicting voter instincts there? Voters who remember that he bailed out the auto industry versus voters who remember he voted for NAFTA.
And where else did you say Macomb, and where else? Because you're right about that.
It's real small. Is Monroe, which is right south of Detroit.
Yes. Okay. Let's see if I got anything from Monroe, because I'll tell you off air. That's how shocked I am about Macomb. All right. I'll tell you off air. I got to get more before I say that out loud.
The other thing is Macomb is more mixed these days. It has a bit of a middle class, upper middle class portion of the county, more so than it was when Stanley Greenberg was
Trump is leading, and he's leading in Monroe too. He is.
That's good.
He's leading in Macomb, and he's leading in Monroe. I'm actually a little shocked at that.
It's how much the auto industry bailout fades versus NAFTA. The more those voters are reminded that it was up to Biden, TPP would have passed.
Right.
Trump was blunt about it when he was there in Michigan. He's like, for all the factories I saved, you guys better vote for me. I mean, it was classic Trump.
That is fun. They had a great time at that rally. They really
absolutely.
did.
And that will be his message. His message will be, okay, maybe Joe Biden did something good for you a decade ago. Remember, he's mostly tried to screw you, and he will screw you in the future.
Yeah. I'm actually a little bit shocked with that, but you know what? Let's take a look at Detroit. Let's see how bad the margin is in Detroit for
I would
Trump.
Be real curious about whether there's an enthusiasm problem in Detroit for Biden. That would be
Whoa, dude. Detroit is currently 65-35. He needs to wipe the floor with Donald Trump in Detroit.
Completely.
So,
absolutely. And he needs turnout to be back to 2012 levels. Which is frankly not going to happen. It will never happen. It'll never be. There's no first-time black man on facing re-election. That's never going to happen. It only gets to happen once by definition. So it will never
going down. Yeah, no. It's just too. I'm including people who these are likely voters, and those who are enthusiastic, and up to slightly.
I'd be curious: is the is there a lower level of extreme enthusiasm for Biden in Wayne County than there is in other parts of the state, or generally? That'd be something else I would track.
That I'll need market site for that, because this is like a raw data processor from Gizmo. I love Gizmo. I do. You know this. Every time I've asked Gizmo for something, folks, because people always ask me, what do I use for different things? I use a lot, but I have my favorites. And for online specifically, I like Survey Gizmo. And every time I've said, listen, I need to do something with you or some other thing we've done, I need something that does this, Gizmo was like, all right, give us a little bit, we'll figure it out. And they've gotten it for me. So, and that includes crazy stuff that I didn't even know about, and apparently just learned about last weekend, about how for branding, how recognizable is your brand. You could give people like a snapshot of store shelves, and it will track facial software into the webcam, Robert, to see which way people move their face. And they said it's crazy. And I was, stunned by that. And actually, when they told me, I immediately thought of what you and I have done. And I'm thinking, you know what? We could see people's facial their expressions based on the questions we ask them. So you know how sometimes they lie during voir dire quite a bit, right? Yeah. So we could actually look at their facial expressions to know, oh, that lady just definitely lied to us,
Well, one of the methods of polling they did briefly in 2016 experimentally by certain groups that they have not come back to 2020, interestingly enough, was neurological polling. So they would MRI your brain in response to certain questions and answered. And they were the first ones to discover that there was a secret Trump vote in part, because people's responding with their brains was saying something differently than they were verbally telling the people.
Right.
And it was disproportionately in favor of Trump, what the gap was. So so you might guess, if we had real neurological testing going on with the future polling, add facial awareness to it and the rest, people would give away that they're actually planning on voting for Trump at better, higher rates than people think. So I think the polls will get a little better as we get closer to tracking polls and the rest, potentially. I mean, not necessarily, but because people will probably be more honest and straightforward about their opinions. At least that's what's happened in the past.
Hopefully.
Exactly.
I'm praying for that.
Yep. But I think as a whole, like for betting purposes, Trump's still a good bet. The Republican House is probably a good bet, given the odds. I mean, I think it's still less
given
than
the
50,
odds.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit less than 50-50 Republicans.
Their candidates suck, man. They blew many districts with bad
It's a place where they're poor campaign management. The poor campaign management only hurts Trump a little. Their poor campaign management hurts Republicans in the House much more substantially due to their poor candidate recruitment. But putting that aside, historically, whenever there has been a major shift in the first midterm of an incumbent, that when the incumbent runs for re-election, there has been, on average, like this happened in 1982, there was a double-digit win by Democrats in the House vote in 82. Same thing, of course, in 1994. There was a double-digit or close to it vote for
2010.
the Republicans. And then again in 2010. And in all three elections, the next time the incumbent presidential party ran 7 points better than they did in the prior midterm in every single one of those. If that happens this time, Republicans do take back the House. So if history holds up on that side of the equation, and interestingly enough, the generic ballot is running lower than where it was at this point in 2018. In the fall of 2018, Media University polls were predicting a 10 to 12 point victory for the Democrats in the generic House ballot. Ended up being 7 if you look at the median race. So it's 8.5 because there was a bunch of uncontested races. But if you look at the median race, Democrats won by 7. So right now they're running at 7 or 8, which suggests a 2 to 3 point outcome if the same bias holds. So, and in that context, Republican would be very close.
Because they don't have to. The House favors Republicans the way the districts are. All right,
completely. For people who don't know, Democrats need to win by more than 3 the generic House vote to generally win the House election. Otherwise, they won by 1 in 2012, still lost the House.
Yeah.
So they need it. They need a little bit of a cushion. Because the House leans Republican. The average House seat is 3 points more Republican than the country, the median House seat. But I think there are problems with individual races where Republicans have failed to raise money and failed to put up good candidates that will undermine their ability to do so. But right now it's trading at 6 to 1 to 8 to 1. So, I mean, I think it's definitely better than that. I mean, I think the worst case, it's a 2-1 chance Republicans take back the House. So at 6-1 to 8-1, that's a live dog, as they say in Vegas.
Right.
And I think we'll see that. And I think the Republicans' position in the Senate's a little better than right now. They're an underdog to keep the Senate. I don't think they should be based on what I've seen so far. We'll get into more detail closer to the election. But for recommended bets for those out there, it's bet Trump, Minnesota, bet Trump, Wisconsin, bet Trump, Pennsylvania, bet Trump, Ohio, bet Trump, Iowa, bet Trump, Florida, bet Trump,
Ohio and
North
Iowa
Carolina.
I can't stress this enough. Ohio and Iowa
those are money in the bank,
close.
and they're
sorry.
trading at like 60%. So basically,
I'm wrong. I'll be stunned, Robert. But there's just when you get into these kinds of leads, it's not statistically likely at all, man.
No, it's minuscule. Biden needs to win by double digits, frankly, to carry Ohio and Iowa.
I do.
And for folks to remember, Barack Obama in 2008. Running against a president with the lowest approval rating of any non-resigned president in American history, running against the party that had just got us involved in a debacle of a war, running against a party that just got us in a debacle of a financial scenario with Wall Street bailout, running against a party that just had massive scandals related to both the Wall Street bailout and the war.
Yeah.
And was the most celebrated media candidate in American history.
In history, yeah.
Could only win by 8 points. So anybody telling me Biden's going to win by a bigger margin than Obama in 2008 is smoking crack.
I agree.
I'll bet anybody, anywhere, any amount of money and give them 10-1 odds that won't happen. Yeah. So for those following for betting purposes, if you followed the show a month ago or so and had bet Trump at 40, you could have sold him at 50 and made a 20% profit in 2 weeks. I don't think he'll drop much below 45 unless there's an October surprise. Now, there was last time, Access Hollywood.
The generals are supposed to, there's some scheme to let everybody know. Robert, I'm sure you've heard about it, but they have this town hall thing cooked up where there's going to be a bunch of generals that come out, some of them who worked for Trump, who are going to say he's unfit to lead. They're going to, looks like Anderson Cooper probably is going to do it. So that's coming. I know they're going to do that.
They need a foreign policy disaster.
That may backfire on them, Robert.
Yeah,
that may backfire.
Particularly if you look at where those votes matter. If Trump was in a close race in a very military stronghold state, say Texas, then maybe a little bit of a different dynamic. But where he needs to win is places that are skeptical of all those generals. That have been I always tell people to understand the working class populist mindset. Watch a lot of your WWE movies, your sniper movies, your old school action movies. What they all have in common, they love the soldier and the tough guy, but they're always the bad guy in those movies is almost not just the enemy. Yeah, it's always military brass. It's all some politicized guy, some politician pretending to be a general who has some dumb hat who probably got his degree from Annapolis, which Annapolis is a point of sarcasm within those films and within the run-of-the-mill military. It's not necessarily a source of esteem and and the rest. They're seen as the rich kids who
they screw over Rambo. They lie to him. I'm Murdoch. I'm coming for you. I mean, come on.
All of that. That's what the whole history is. And so generals that's what the media still doesn't understand.
Nobody cares about them.
They keep pitching the Mitt Romney voter.
That's right. They're hoping enough of those leave, but they don't understand there's not many of them.
They're way too small from the get-go. There's a reason why Romney couldn't even get out working class voters in 2012. They need something like Russia invades 4 countries. They need a major incident to occur that somehow can be blamed on Trump overseas, sort of like Iranian hostages, 1980, something on that scale. Without that, they could have another Access Hollywood. Nobody's going to care. They keep running the old 2016 script over and over again. Oh, here's some military people that will say bad stuff about him. Here's some Gold Star people that will say bad stuff about him. The country's already been through that. That's not going to move that's all baked in the cake. They know who Trump is. They don't care about any of that anymore. They need issues. What they really need was a massive COVID resurgence that they could blame on Trump.
That would be the issue that could sink him, though, Robert. That would be it, because among those people who are still very concerned about COVID, that there were some voters. The commenter was right before. They're there. We see them.
Yeah, particularly seniors.
Yeah, particularly seniors, but he's obviously making gains in other places. That'll be the question in the selection, who does the net.
And
that's all.
That issue is
who
fading.
gets the net.
Big Ten football's coming back. So their ability to keep portraying everything as abnormal is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I think they believed their own nonsense about the models that, the Bill Gates driven models that said, oh, the world's going to fall apart and everybody's going to die and so on and so forth. I think they bought it. So they think they don't have to engineer it. And the problem is it's not going to happen. There's not going to be a big COVID death resurgence anywhere. It's going to keep declining. Even through the flu season that starts in October. So I think the net effect is that I think they're banking on that, but I think they're going to be sadly mistaken, and then they're going to be too late in the game to really rig it. All they have left is lawsuits and trying to rob as many ballots as they can. And right now they're not getting I don't think right as of now they can get enough out of Minnesota. There's not many votes to rob out of Minnesota or Wisconsin. They could try to rob out of Pennsylvania and Michigan, but that won't be enough because they're going to lose Florida. I think they have a good shot in Arizona. I don't think they have the shot they think they do. Though there again is a case of, a terrible Republican Senate candidate. I mean, they put her up twice, no less.
Yeah, she's bad. I mean, look, I'm sure she's a wonderful woman, but she is not a good candidate. And
never was.
To answer I'm just from scrolling through and looking at a couple things. I really don't need Market Site to answer your question before. Adding those enthusiasm numbers doesn't help Biden in Wayne. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's still 65-35. For people who don't know, Donald Trump got 27% of the vote in Wayne. So for him to be at 35 with quite a few responses is something. And then in Monroe, it's funny, that does help. So the more less excited voter does help Biden in some areas, like in Macomb, it doesn't. That's interesting as well. But in Monroe, which Trump carried with 58% of the vote in 2016, he's at 63.5%. And if you take away, not take away, if you give Biden a bigger, what if everybody votes, right? Even those people who are not likely, they're less than 50% likely, that only drags Trump down to 61.5, which is still an increase over 2016.
I think your blue collar Biden voters who's not going to vote disproportionately. Whereas your blue-collar Trump voter is disproportionately going to vote.
He should not be up that much, though, Robert. In I agree. In Macomb, the way he is, that's one that Biden needs to take back.
That means the trade issue is forcing
overwhelming
the bailout issue into the background.
Yeah,
and so if the trade issue trumps the bailout issue, then Trump wins Michigan too.
In Macomb, I wish I had a little bit more to say something definitive, but Monroe, that looks solid.
And I like Monroe because it's more distinctively working class. Because Macomb has these
have the professional middle class.
It has Grosse Pointe Blank and that extended kind of area. You have a little bit of and it's been growing. It's been growing since. Also increasingly African American too, so that can change the dynamics a bit.
It's a lot of votes in Macomb.
In 1984, when when Stanley Greenberg was studying in the 1990s, it was just a blue collar, ethnic, working class suburb of Detroit. Now it's almost like an extension of northern Detroit. I mean, it's such a cross section of people that are in more in southern Macomb than northern Macomb, but it makes Macomb relevant. But Monroe is more of a microcosm of your blue collar suburban Detroit voter now than Macomb is to a certain degree.
It tells you a lot about those other counties that people underestimated.
If you know how the blue-collar ethnic voter in Monroe is going to go, you can pretty accurately predict how that blue-collar ethnic voter is going to vote throughout the Detroit metropolitan
Saginaw is tied. Saginaw is tied at 47%. So that's but again, I
assume I can't.
Barack Obama carried Saginaw, man. He carried.
What about the Ann Arbor County? Well, I think it's Washtenaw, but I mispronounced it.
Yeah, let's look. Let's see if we got.
I assume
Trump lost that one.
Oh yeah, by a good margin.
By a giant margin. Let's see what is going on over there.
Biden needs the vote. He needs to be winning that by a bigger margin.
Oh, by the way, Saginaw is only tied when I add those voters. I did not take that away. Yeah, so there's not really enough in Saginaw. So if I was to take away those less than 50% likely voters, I can almost I would cut off my left, if I was wrong. And you know what I mean? It's that obvious. We don't have enough in that area of the state, man, to really say, 20 something responses. We need a lot more than that. That's a big county. So again, this is why I'm letting it go for a day, because There's a lot of votes out there, folks. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Trump got 27% of the vote roughly. And he only got 50. Well, it still was 50,000 and change. Hillary got 68% of the vote, and it was just under 129,000. So it's a nice chunk, and we need more responses before we could, really say anything about it. But this is why I had to let it go a little bit more, because again, most pollsters would cut it off, Robert. They would stop it, and they would say, you know what, we're good, we got enough, and that's
what they do is they overweight.
Yes.
And the problem is
can't extrapolate to compensate, man.
Exactly.
Can't do it.
Exactly. Because what you get is an unrepresentative sample. I mean, because all polling is trying to talk to one person who's going to tell you the opinion of 1 million people. And if that one person doesn't represent, that 1 million people, then you've got a bad data point. Yeah. And that's where you need 10, because amongst the 10, collectively, you'll have a better estimate of what that 1 million people will do. And that's what the media polls are not doing. And that's why when they're showing numbers, Republicans being more divided than Democrats, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Just the presidential primary participation rates. Trump is
does if you only call Metro Republicans.
Yes, exactly.
That's it.
If all your Republican voters are in Ann Arbor or Grosse Pointe Blank, then you're going to get a double digits for Biden.
Yeah.
But if it's the rest of the state, you're going to get 2% maybe for Biden. What's
a big city in Washington? Let me zoom in.
That's Ann Arbor.
It's Ann Arbor. Yeah, that's right. Ann Arbor. You're right. Let's look. I may be able to find some by city and surrounding area. So let's take a look at Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor, AN, just like where the Survey of Consumers is, right?
Yep. Same place. It's where University of Michigan is.
Let's look. Right. Ann Arbor, ARBOR, right? Okay, let's do it now. I bet you it'll pull it from the city. Yeah, so he's leading. Joe Biden's leading with 63% of the vote there. So but that's just the city. Down. That's just the city. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's actually just the city.
Like if he was going to do well, he'd want Madison type numbers. He'd want to be in the 70s.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? Give him some time. We gotta get more in anyway. So again, this is Michigan, folks. The distribution looks pretty good. I just want more numbers in some areas. Like that's why I didn't want to say what Macomb is either exactly, because Trump looks good in Macomb, but maybe not if we get a little bit more. So I'm like superstitious, man. I am.
The way to cross check Macomb is Monroe. Yeah. So if he's doing above average in Monroe, then it would make sense he's doing above average in Macomb.
Yeah. And you know what? For those numbers, all of those numbers, actually, I did expand. I did not have a tight screen. I did expand it. So I may even be a little bit favorable to Biden with that. But who knows? Maybe he gets every damn voter because they hate Donald Trump. I don't think that's going to happen, folks. Like I'm in the camp with Robert. I don't see some of these voters in Wayne County running out to vote for an old white man just because he was on the ticket with the first black president.
That they all know has dementia.
See it. Yeah, I mean, really, you know what? I wanted to ask about that. We didn't, and I wanted to, because the Fox poll, I knew somebody like Fox would come out and do what they did the other day. Who's more mentally fit to be president? That's not the question. Because people who hate Trump will simply just say, they said the same thing with Hillary. She won on mental fitness 2-1 and lost the election badly. The question is, do you think Joe Biden has dementia or some kind of diminished capacity? Ask nicely about it, but that is the proper way to ask that, because then they'll be more honest with you about, maybe how important is it to your vote. I have seen polling where people, like half the country, thinks Joe Biden has dementia.
Yes.
I have seen polling, and the media just isn't doing the polling like campaigns do it, where you ask them just bluntly, do you think Joe Biden is senile, and how important is that to your vote?
If the role was reversed, they'd be saying it over and over.
Oh, again. Absolutely, man. They would absolutely.
I mean, they brought up
so-and-so on CNN said Donald Trump is senile. Do you agree?
They not only brought up John McCain's age, they brought up the history of him being tortured in 2008. I mean, you talk about brutal.
Republican.
It's amazing they come to great defense to John McCain's honor now, and I hate John McCain. I'm not a fan, but it's funny because in 2008,
now they care.
They're basically like saying this crazy guy got tortured too much. He's probably going to hit the nuke button this moment he gets in there. He'll have a flashback. Not only that, he's old. Look how old he is.
It's crazy.
Read all his medical records. He's senile. So and now of course they treat him like, oh, so he's a wonderful saint.
Yeah, we need to chisel him right along with the rest of the founders in Capitol Hill.
And they would have crushed him even worse if Obama hadn't started to take a big lead by October. They would have really poured it on. They just poured it on in September when it was close.
If there wasn't a catastrophe right before the election, then that absolutely would have happened,
Oh, no
and then
doubt.
in weird things going on, again, small sample, weird things like, Joe Biden's not that far down in Kalamazoo, I mean, so some things are a little bit, but that's the nature of polling. Sometimes
I think some of those counties that some of those upper middle class, almost Mormon types that exist in the eastern part amongst your old sort of Dutch.
He's not that down from 2016, just to be clear. I said that backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, so that wouldn't surprise
like 55.
me. I would expect him to hold steady in that part of the state. A lot of your Dutch Reformed, your Reformed Lutherans and that crowd that's big there. Calvin College is based out of there. It was a big Trump weak point in the Republican presidential primaries in 2016.
In the primary,
it's a group that doesn't really like. It's like the Mormons who really don't like Trump's personality at all. So I would expect them to run about even there. But the key is going to be keeping his blue collar vote out of Detroit and then running it up north and then watching Detroit have a decline in turnout. That's all he needs, and he's in like Flint, Michigan. Yeah. But with a Democratic governor, a corrupt Democratic governor, and a corrupt political machine in Detroit, unless he wins by more than a point with the actual votes, he's at risk of it getting stolen from him.
Yeah, he cannot take that kind of a margin like he had last time.
No, they will not let that happen twice.
No, they're not going to let it happen. But for Trump voters, the best thing the most consolation I can give you right now is that in some of the things we talked about today, it was the first time I really looked at it. Like I said, I'm superstitious, and I'll look at regions broad where it distributes.
I think we may have lost Richard momentarily.
Oh, there I am. I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah, I glitched out. I was just saying, take solace in a little deep state freeze. Take solace in the fact that, in some of those I just looked at, I'm actually a little bit surprised in how well he's doing, and especially even in blue areas like Wayne. This is the thing, Robert. I think, after this, I guess we'll wrap it. It's like 4:08, but I will say this, man, and then get your thoughts on it. This is not going to be the same coalition versus coalition thing in 2016. It's just not.
Right.
I think people are going to be totally flabbergasted. They're not going to know how to call states. They're going to see some things and think it's either better for Biden or better for Trump. And they'll make these ridiculous pronouncements over it. And then something else will happen that'll counter it. Like, oh, well, Biden's doing so much better in whatever, maybe Western Minnesota. But then they don't realize he's getting clobbered in the Northeast, and same thing. We see this in Florida all the time. Trump's doing so much better in Miami, but maybe he's running a little weaker in Monroe or something. I mean, I just think these people they don't look at things like that they're dynamic. They're not static. And
exactly.
Different coalition.
You have polarizing movements. So post-college areas will trend Biden. The African-American areas will show lower turnout. Mexican-American areas and Cuban and Puerto Rican, well, definitely Cuban and some Puerto Ricans and like places like Florida will trend Trump. But basically across the class barrier, you'll see high school educated voters groups or areas where that's a particularly strong voter group trend Trump. And in aggregate, I think that's what favors him because that group, the high school to post-college ratio is more Trump friendly in all of the key swing states. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, Ohio, even Arizona, and definitely Florida and Nevada. Like the reason why Nevada is still competitive is because it has very little professional class population.
Oh, I meant to ask you your thoughts on that. You know what? We can't go without you weighing in on that. He ran out there. John McLaughlin was on saying, and then somebody else too, or it was John, his pollster. He was on like ABC this week saying they're ahead in his polling. And Miller, Stephen Miller was on, I think, or somebody with the other Miller, maybe. I may be mixing up their names. What are your thoughts here? Come on, bring.
Oh yeah, I know a novice political bettor out here in Vegas that is very gung ho. I can tell you what they think in the sports books because they would set odds if they could legally. All the sports books people that I've talked to believe Trump is going to win easily. So that gives you, and they didn't think that in 2016.
In Nevada or in the country?
Nationwide. And they think it'll be very competitive in Nevada. So now historically polling has overfavored Republicans in Nevada because they have a difficulty polling both Mexican-American voters that are a big group, and especially they miss Filipinos and Asian groups that have been trending Democratic now. And that's one group that's still trending Democratic. From a lot of groups are reversing, but post-college voters and Asian voters are trending even more Democratic than they voted in 2016. And so unless a poll has an adequate subsample of that vote, and in particular in Nevada, that's a heavily Filipino group, then Chinese Americans after that. Some good sized Vietnamese, decent, actually Hawaiian, Samoan population here. So what's trending in favor, what has Trump in the game is your highest likely to vote group. Non-Hispanic whites over the age of 45 are trending very, very Trumpish here.
Yeah, they are.
So if he does in fact get double-digit improvement amongst working class Mexican American voters here, like he is showing signs of nationwide, and it's still immigration sensitive voter group here, but not as immigration sensitive as say East LA. The net effect is that I think it'll be very close. I think now here they're doing what I told people is he needs to win the lawsuit, because right now they're allowed to count ballots more than 2 weeks after Election Day.
It's crazy.
Effectively, they could postmark them a week afterwards. They're not supposed to, but their standards are so low you could get away with it.
Nobody's going to count. Yeah, nobody is going to.
The governor has put precincts in the Democratic parts of Las Vegas and not in the Republican parts of the state. So there's not even a voting precinct on Election Day for some rural county areas.
Should be criminal. That should be criminal, man.
I mean, so it's and almost every federal judge in Nevada was appointed by the consent of Harry Reid. So I talked to a very high-ranking state political official here. I was asking about some other lawsuits that we could possibly bring, and he reaffirmed what I believed was the case. He said you'll get no relief because almost all of them are Reid-connected. And he said it's true of the state court, too. This is 100% that was a high-ranking. Oh, absolutely. There's a reason Harry Reid got so rich in office. It wasn't lucky stock picking.
Right.
So that's the nature of Harry Reid. So I think because of the corruption factor, Nevada will still vote for Biden unless Trump wins the suit, and they say it's going to likely require the U.S. Supreme Court get involved. If the U.S. Supreme Court comes in and says only ballots that get returned by Election Day count, then Trump has a real shot here. If not, then Trump will be leading on Election Day and magically lose.
And he'll lose
over the next. I mean, they're right now up to 14 days after Election Day. They can keep counting and getting and receiving ballots.
And let me show people what that means. This is the voter file in Nevada. Okay, this is Clark County alone. See, I just excluded out everybody else. Clark County. I removed the deceased and change of address flag people. And
critical
I added
Democratic voting groups in Las Vegas. I remember years ago they found that the entire Dallas Cowboys football team was registered to vote in Clark County. Bugs Bunny had multiple voter not just was registered to vote, had multiple voter registrations.
Was he active too? I bet he was.
Apparently. I mean, you probably can't search for him through that mechanism, but yes, apparently was two of the Bugs Bunny were active voters.
See, it's no joke, folks. It's no joke. They'll do it. There's 190,000 ballots that are going to be flying around because they're going to go out. This is Clark County alone. It's not a big vote state.
I think they had 200. Nevada had 200,000 votes. Most of them out of Nevada returned for invalid addresses.
That's right. I mean, right.
That tells you what that doesn't include all the people who kept ballots that didn't belong to them.
Right. That's exactly right. This is what they really got to understand. And Clark County is, 7 in 10 of every votes that's cast in the state, but it's 84% of the dirty roll problem statewide. And remember, so even if Republicans wanted to counter cheat, Robert, it would be disproportionately unfair for them to counter cheat,
Yes, they couldn't successfully achieve it.
You couldn't do it. It's not enough.
And they have very loose standards of postmarks here, such that basically you could not postmark it and then post office counted as postmarked, even though it was after the Election Day. The other problem you have here is you could have postal employees. They're the ones who postmark it. Yep. They could postmark ballots as having been
whatever the hell they want
before Election Day, even if they weren't a week or 10 days later.
That's absolutely true.
It's a disaster here in Nevada. So he needs to win that suit. But if we had an honest election in Nevada, I would put Nevada at 50-50.
Yeah, really. You really would. Yeah.
Because of what's happening. I was nervous, and I'm still nervous about the major unemployment problem we have here from the massive layoffs, because Vegas has not rebounded at all. But two things have happened. One is apparently people from like South Central in particular decided to use the discounts that Las Vegas casinos are to raid Vegas. And so you got guys who think they're at an urban strip club in the middle of the Wynn, and they're like doing strip shows and throwing money around and getting into fights and brawls. The Wynn is actually tracking them all down individually to sue them, because to try to discourage it. But basically, the large parts of the strip have been taken over as if the Las Vegas moved to Compton. And so apparently the $100, you could go to a hotel at the Wynn for $99. Apparently all the drug dealer folks decided that. Usually that was a problem during the Mayweather fights.
Right.
People told me, African-American friends of mine, I was like, hey, you want to go down the Mayweather fight? And they're like, oh, no, you don't understand who comes in for the Mayweather fight. It's basically every drug dealer in America feels an obligation to go to Floyd's fights. You walk out into the strip and it was like walking into a gun shop. I mean, it was just massive pot everywhere. Everybody's dressing like Lil Wayne, like it's a Lil Wayne dress costume competition. So you have that dynamic coming back, which has ticked a lot of locals off. You've had of course the crime and the riot problems, which have ticked a lot of locals off. But the other is older voters that are Trumpish, like in the Midwest, have been disproportionately flooding registrations in the Republican direction here. And that's why what should have been a big Democratic pickup over the summer in voter registrations actually became a Republican net pickup, which has never happened in Nevada in recent history.
Right. So, it's been a slide. Exactly.
So the schools are not fully functional and opening here, and that's had backfiring effects. So the economy is still a problem for Trump here. But they increasingly are shifting their blame for that. So what's happening is, because once Biden made the mistake of saying he would shut down again, that's why Trump is running that ad nonstop here in Nevada. Biden wins, Vegas is never going to rebound.
He better keep that up. I mean, that one is right.
Hammering it. It's the only ad he's running here in Nevada repeatedly on a constant cycle. If you watched a football game here, you saw it 10 times. So that's what flipped. So even though the lockdown created a major unemployment problem, which backfired on Trump here, when before that he was doing quite well, it was very competitive for him here. The fact that Biden is talking about another lockdown while Vegas has not been able to rebound, combined with these cultural effects of what's happening, has put Trump in the driver's seat if he had an honest election here. I don't trust Trump's pollster. He's I think he's a quasi fraud. So I've had dealings with him in other contexts where I think he just makes up the numbers, frankly.
I hate to agree with Robert, but I'm going to 100%. I've been on the other side of races with him before. I know what he did with Netanyahu across the pond. Eric Cantor, I remember that one. That was another. He was telling Eric Cantor he had no problem with Dave Bratt. He was going to win by 13 points or something like that. I mean, it was a long time ago, folks. I don't remember exactly. Florida, what happened in Florida was much more recent, and I remember that. And some people have heard this story before, but I'll quickly tell. I mean, he leaked that poll saying Salazar was up over Shalala just to get it to hurt our candidate, my candidate who had hired me. She was not up over Donna Shalala. We were neither one of us were ever up over her. She was going to beat us in Florida 27. And actually mine was a little bit closer because of her name recognition. He did that simply to sway the votes of Republican voters. And he lied to his candidate. I would never, ever tell my candidate they are going to win if you know they are going to lose. That is, folks, there's no other betrayal that you could give as a pollster. There's no other betrayal.
The other giveaway is he has Arizona and Nevada is the same, which is not happening. I mean, Arizona was almost 6 points more Republican than Nevada in 2016.
Yes.
Arguably,
it's not close now, Robert.
It was similar in 2018. So
voter file's Democrat +5 in Nevada. The voter file is Republican +3 or 4 in Arizona. I mean, it's not even close. They're not the same electorates.
So the fact that he has Trump up by 2.
Nevada, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nah. I hate that pronunciation of it.
Man, I'll never get it.
Yeah, or some people tell me it's Nevada.
I
They do it that way. It's like, I don't care. I
What do
know what
they
it
say in your state? What do they say?
it's either Nevada or Nevada.
That's what
Uh,
I always thought it was, Nevada, but
yeah, so it is sort of the second one is what I hear most commonplace, but remember, a large portion of the state is not from the state,
it's
so
not from the state,
yes,
right? So that's actually Nevada or
and I think it's
Nevada.
pronunciated
That was the
differently,
older.
yes, but the
Yeah.
older
Okay.
traditional when it was much more of a rural state,
Yeah.
when Vegas had a lot of just folks from the Midwest and the Southwest here, folks that
Right.
define barbecue as brisket rather than pork, that kind of thing. A lot of West Texas folks. Now it's got a bigger Midwestern population than a Hawaiian and Asian population, than a big Mexican American population. So they all pronunciate it differently, in my experience. So
Yeah.
they still say Holmes at the Mexican American barbershop that I go to.
Holmes.
Hey, what's up, Holmes?
It was
So
Holmes.
it's like the movie Colors from
That's
1995.
great.
Trump with a legitimate election could be competitive, but right now we will not get a legitimate election out of Nevada. So I think that's where we stand. But good odds. I mean, I think it's still 3-1, 4-1 odds if you bet Trump for Nevada. So I think that's worth the betting.
It's still worth giving it a cry. You would think, yeah, it's
Yeah,
still worth the bet.
they have a hard time polling here. Siena also had it close, though favoring Biden. But you'll see public polls that show it close. So if you're betting for the purposes of getting money in and out of the market, not waiting for election day, Nevada's a good bet because it will probably trade as much as 40% for Trump compared to the 25% it's currently at.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to leave it, folks. That's a good place. Robert will have much more to talk about next week because we'll have more actual number, and then actually more because there's another one that's going to roll right on the back of that. This is the busy season, but I feel so much better to talk about this stuff now that we have our own numbers because I don't rely on any of these idiots anymore. That's the media, the internals for the Democrats, Republicans. They're all wrong. I'm telling you, the major takeaways here. This is a shift, and it's going to be who got the net, who shifted quicker and made a net gain out of it. There are more people in one group than the other, and I think that's the story the media is missing. And nationally, we added about 4 points that Americans thought Trump was going to win. In the Rust Belt, it's more. And by the way, his popularity, same thing. 2016, his popularity was higher in the Rust Belt than it was in the nation overall. And it's just interesting. I just want people to remember, Robert and I are showing you these distributions for a reason. Everybody else, because I get these questions all day long. Did you see this poll? What about it? What do you have to say about it? What do you think of this one? I can't say everything about every pollster. I could just tell you this. They would all stop in Iowa right now. Mm-hmm. They would all stop in Minnesota right now. They would. I mean, we did pretty well, I think. In Pennsylvania, we're solid. But, I mean, some areas in Michigan, I want more. In some areas of Wisconsin, I want more. In some areas of Minnesota and Iowa, they would stop, folks. They would say, a couple hundred in Iowa, I'm done. They would stop. They would not do what we're trying to do to get a representative sample. And that crap matters. It matters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's critical because you have groups that are very different. You're trying to find one person that represents 100,000. In order to do that, you need a diverse cross sample that requires you reach voters who generally don't want to respond to polls.
That's it. Bottom line. Don't forget to follow Robert at Barnes_Law on Twitter. All right. And I supposed to have this paper. I don't know. I was doing some radio show. I forgot. So I was going to pitch that. I don't know. I'll tweet it out later. But yeah, don't forget, guys, we are Mondays now, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's going to stick that way. All right. So when Inside the Numbers is Tuesday through Friday. What are the odds? Monday at 2 p.m. And we're going to. These graphics aren't done. That's why I asked you. This guy's taking forever. That's why I asked you, how long are we going to keep going? Because I'm going to start to put a fire under them. We're going to have our own graphics soon here, folks. It's going to be pretty cool. I can't wait to unveil it. It'll be neat, All right, but don't miss it. We're not changing the time because I'm getting a lot of these questions. 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. All right, and we'll see you back next week. Look at that. That's in the camera. She's like, "Oh, you're getting off air. Have a glass of wine." All the best, folks. We'll see you next week.